Good evening and welcome to After Dark, or as it was called in the Daily Mail's front page story this morning, Around Midnight. What the press get wrong and what the press get right is something everybody here tonight has opinions about. We'd hoped pop singer Boy George was going to be with us, but he's not. If you're watching Boy George, we're here for a couple of hours and would love you to join us here. Now to the guests who are here. Harvey Proctor was a Conservative MP from 1979 until last year, when he resigned as a candidate 4 days before he pleaded guilty to charges of gross indecency. His solicitor, Sir David Napley, said in court, "This case came before the court because it was initiated by a journalist in order to sell his newspaper." Lester Middlehurst currently works for Today newspaper as the show business editor. He's been a journalist for 16 years, starting out in Lincolnshire, moving on to Brighton, before arriving in Fleet Street. Annette Witheridge currently has a column in the Star, but until recently was working on the News of the World. She tells us that she's frequently worked undercover. One of the stories she worked on featured Harvey Proctor. Christine Keeler was 15 when she first appeared in Titbits. She shared a flat with a girl named Mandy Rice Davis and got involved with John Profumo, the then Minister of War, while simultaneously sharing her affections with a suspected Russian spy. As a result, John Profumo resigned 25 years ago tonight. Peter Hillmore tells us that he always wanted to be a journalist. For several years he was the Guardian's diarist. Later he was Pendennis, the Observer gossip columnist. Now he's developing a new section for the paper. Nina Myskow was, until last Sunday, a journalist in Fleet Street who at one point worked for the News of the World. On Sunday, they chose to make her the front page story. She'll tell us whether this is a case of the biter bit. Laurie Manifold began his career at 15 on a local paper. He's worked for a number of daily and weekly Fleet Street papers until he retired from the Sunday People in 1985. He tells us that Christine Keeler sold him some stories. Harvey Proctor, if I can turn to you first. When you read about the stories in the newspaper and read about yourself, do you recognize yourself in the stories?
No, because I think in the last few years the press had decided to label me as some sort of monster, and they were going to try and write stories and find things out, and if they couldn't find things out, they would invent them or make them up. So no, I couldn't recognize myself, and nor could my friends. I think the people who really know you were the ones who were the most sympathetic, because they said, you know, this isn't you.
When did the press get involved with you?
Well, I suppose probably during the 70s when I was a parliamentary candidate. I suppose in some detail from 1979 when I became a member of Parliament. Perhaps one of the reasons for that was that I stood in a rock-solid Labour constituency in the general election of 1979, called Basildon in the Green County of Essex, against Eric Mooman, who was a Labour Member of Parliament with a 10,500 majority. He was a print union-sponsored Member of Parliament. He was never expected to lose that seat, or I was never expected to win it, but I happened to win it. Now, from 1979 onwards, I always regarded that the press were never going to let me forget that I defeated one of their own. So I would date it from 1979 onwards. I think the first time that I had a real difficulty with the press was about Christmas of that year. I'd just got into the House of Commons. I was finding my feet. And my local paper, because we may be talking about Fleet Street, but my criticism would extend to a provincial, regional press too. My local paper in Basildon, an evening paper, ran a story that this new Member of Parliament had not turned up at the House of Commons to meet a group of mentally handicapped children and their parents who came to lobby him at the House of Commons. Now, of course, that group had told everyone. They told the local paper, they told the media, they told television. Everyone but their local Member of Parliament. I didn't know that they were going to the House of Commons. But the local evening paper knew exactly where I was that lunchtime. I was actually at my local post office in Basildon, overseeing the Christmas mail arrangements, the sort of thing that a Member of Parliament would do as part of his normal constituency duties. Now, how did the Evening Echo in Basildon know that? Because they sent a photographer and a reporter to the post office. And they were talking to me when I was supposed to be letting people down at the House of Commons. Now, they ran the story in that night's paper with no mention of my visit to the post office. I complained bitterly to the editor of the paper, and the next day they ran what they claimed to be an apology, which rather reiterated exactly the features of the story to begin with. But they said, Mr. Proctor claimed that he visited Basildon Post Office that day and was unaware of the mentally handicapped children's visit to the House of Commons. I then remonstrated with the editor of the paper to print a proper story and to print the photograph of the visit to the post office. He didn't do that, and he said, well, I will try and mention it in an editorial. It took me about 3 weeks of refusing to comment to my local paper before that paper printed the true story in an editorial, which said, of course, Mr. Proctor, two wrongs don't make a right. You shouldn't have stopped talking to us because that means you stopped talking to your constituents. But only then did I actually get the truth of that story out in the paper. And to this day, that paper never printed the picture of me visiting the post office that day. But that's perhaps not the sort of thing that you want to get into, but it goes back as far as then.
I mean, the first thing I want to say is the idea that the press might or might not have attacked you because you overthrew a member of the print union is rather nonsensical, because, I mean, I don't think that many journalists knew that Moonman was a print union man. The idea that the printers dictated editorial policy is nonsense. The NUJ have no links with the print union. You said at the beginning that because you unseated a print union-sponsored MP, we were out to get you. I think that is a little too Machiavellian.
Oh, well, I think that was only one reason. There are a number of reasons, but that was the start of it.
Some journalists I know, even perhaps as faint as myself, would have been delighted that members of the print union, to whom some of us in the NUJ were very much opposed to their old-fashioned methods, we would have been delighted that you overthrew him, Mr. Proctor, and quite the opposite effect of what you suggest.
But that view did not come over at the time in any of the press. You see, it was rather a nice, cosy arrangement in Basildon locally, because it was rather nice to have a Labour MP that bans the other Conservative members in Essex.
That your downfall came from the fact that nobody printed a photograph of you at Basildon Post Office.
But with respect, I'm answering the question of our host and chairman, not your question. If you want to put that question to me, well, then obviously I give a slightly different answer. But I'm trying to get the context without going into the heart of it straight away.
What is the answer to his question?
As to what the reason.
Do you think the cause of your downfall?
Oh, it was political.
I think so. Because I was struck by the quote we had at the beginning about David Napley saying that your downfall came from a story instigated by a journalist to sell newspapers. Well, journalists are supposed to instigate stories. It so happened that you broke the law. It may have been an iniquitous law that you broke, but nonetheless it was the law. You were a member of a party which preaches law and order, dedicated to upholding the law. It seems to me it was a journalist's job to reveal that you broke the law. If it sold newspapers, so be it. But the idea that it was a circulation booster to, and here I sound even more pompous than usual, in order to reveal undoings, it was to sell newspapers. And that's the journalist's job, was to reveal that you broke the law. And David Napley's speech was nonsense.
Well, that question you would have to put to Sir David. My comment was that certain journalists, not all journalists, but certain journalists, acted from a political motivation. I know that only too well, because I know some of the people, some of my friends, who were approached by a particular journalist, one or two journalists, in return for money to give stories, obviously wanted to know what the motivation was and asked for the motivation. And the motivation wasn't to sell newspapers, actually. It wasn't actually to do a story. It wasn't actually to have a moral statement. It was a political cause that they didn't like my views on immigration and race relations, which I was very well known, and that the press never gave me a fair press on those views.
I won't have that.
Well, I'm sorry, but
no, because before
I've made.
I looked at the cuttings,
Yes.
and it seemed to me you got a lot of revelations about you were in the Daily Mail, in the Daily Telegraph, in the Daily Express, and the idea that those are three Tory newspapers, and the idea that you once again your downfall came from politically motivated journalists. The idea that Sir David English was politically motivated to bring about the downfall of a Tory MP, well, I mean, it's a non sequitur in itself.
Well, I'm
I
sorry, but
disagree.
you're muddling a few things here, because certainly there were some journalists who had that motivation. I know that for a fact.
You should blame your friends for accepting the money rather than journalists for offering them.
I know that for a fact. Of course, other journalists then had a responsibility to look at the comments of other newspapers, and newspapers do feed one off the other. They instantly rush out to get the early editions of their competitors' newspapers to see if they can sort of, if they've missed anything, or if they can sort of add to the story. But the main motivation was a political motivation. Thereafter, there might have been a whole range, a host of other motivations following along. But the main one, the main investigative nature of my downfall, and I've analysed this both for about a year when I was the target and the year since the events. I've gone over this time and time again to sort of consider it. And I still believe that to be so on the evidence that has been presented to me subsequent to that event.
Can you explain how you know that to be a fact, though, that the journalists that brought about your downfall were politically motivated? I mean, what's your justification for saying that you know that to be a fact?
Because they explained, some of my friends asked for the reason and were told the reason. And it wasn't about morality, it wasn't about selling newspapers, it was because these particular journalists disliked my views on immigration and race relations.
Politicians. You see, Peter, you said that you can't believe that Sir David English would publish just a Tory manifesto or whatever the Tory party wanted to drop. Of course they do.
I didn't say that.
Well, I'm paraphrasing.
I cannot believe that papers as Tory as the ones I mentioned brought about the downfall of Harvey Proctor.
Well, perhaps Harvey's... I'm not here to defend Harvey. Perhaps Harvey's saying there are Tory politicians who brought him down. I worked on the Daily Express for 6 weeks. I know it was only 6 weeks. It was so boring I had to leave. And I happen to know that there's almost a hotline where information that is going to be useful to the government of the day is dropped and fed to the Daily Express, the Sun, the Mail, the Telegraph. I have no idea, but I assume.
Let me, if I may, bring in Christine Keeler.
Well,
Where did it all begin with you?
Well, I absolutely agree with what Harvey Proctor said, because I know that myself, I know that I do believe in the freedom of the press. Obviously, we must have that. But some of these scandalous newspapers, the gutter press, I think probably these days do go further and do. I know that certain people are certainly trying to use me at this. I certainly have people on my back at this minute in time, press, who are certainly trying to use me politically, to make up their own particular story, to use for their own political means. And so I absolutely agree with what Harvey Proctor has to say.
How did it begin with you? How did you get involved with the press?
Well, my personal life at the time, I was going through some problems in my personal life, and somebody took a shot at me, and from that moment on, I had 20, 30 members of the press at my door hanging about when I came in and out, and this went on for months and months. And then I did speak to the press because it had ruined my modelling career. So, and I wanted somebody to represent me in court, somebody legally to represent me in court. And so I did go to the press. This was months after they were stalking and making my life a misery, just hanging about my door and day in and day out, many of them. And so I went to the press with a story. Actually, they got into my place by pretending to be a so-called friend's fiancé, and they said that they couldn't mention the minister's name, and I thought, oh well, what harm can it be if they can't mention his name? So I didn't realise that, you know, by giving them a letter, and that brought his downfall anyway. But I thought that, oh well, I'll make some money, and they can't mention his name anyway. This was Jack Profumo, of course. Mm-hmm. But for months before that, a few months before that, they hung around my doorstep from, you know, all the time, 24 hours a day. And but I do agree with what Harvey Proctor said. I absolutely agree that the press, or certain members of the press, do use and make up stories, and for their own political reasons. I absolutely know that.
I'd be absolutely fascinated to hear how Miss Keeler is of use to anybody politically. Very puzzling, that, but there we are. Well, I must be virgin white in this one, Miss Keeler, if I may use the expression. I only bought some very, very nice and lovely material from you, which turned out to go down like a lead balloon with the public. It was very interesting. After the main sensation, you got married.
Meeting you
well, we dealt through agents and such. I dealt with the money.
Really?
Yes.
Well, you must explain where.
And I didn't have this.
Because I don't believe anything the press have to say. So
you got married to a very charming young man, I thought, when I met him, and you had a very lovely baby. Very pretty baby.
Yes.
And you approached the wicked press for agents, I think it was.
I approached the press?
Well, the agents did.
Absolutely not. I didn't have any agents. I had a solicitor in those days.
Well, a solicitor agent. No, somebody acted for it.
No,
and the offer was that for a very nice sum of money, we could have the exclusive pictures of you and your baby in hospital.
Fair enough, because you were on my doorstep day and night anyway, and you were going to get them. You made our life a misery, may I say. And well, so it was better just to come to some arrangement with you, let you take your shot and all go away. And that's exactly what took place. Because you were living on my doorstep. You have never left me alone. Even to this day, I had to take my own life into my hands, because every few months when I was trying to bring up my children, there would be something, the Vice Queen or something of which happened 25 years ago, 20 years, 15 years ago even. Your Vice Queen.
Well, I don't think there's anything about Vice Queen. They were very lovely pictures. It was a very pretty baby. I think we paid you something like £12,000 or something for them. The pictures were posed, dozens of them were taken, and they were very lovely pictures. And the story, as I recall it at the time, was Christine Keeler's happiness again. And it was done very nicely with a very large cheque to you. And we thought, as a wicked newspapermen, that this would sell and people would like to see you happy and the baby and all the rest of it. After all, you weren't in the news, to put it mildly. On the contrary, the thing went down like a lead balloon. It didn't sell at all. Men looked at the pictures of Christine with a beautiful baby, just like any other mum, and they weren't interested at all, because you weren't at all a naughty lady in a picture like that. You were a lovely housewife with a beautiful baby, and women looked at it and said, my goodness, it's that girl, and put it down. It didn't go, it went down like a lead balloon, so you did very well money-wise out of that. And the newspapers
as
made
I
nothing.
said, you were on my doorstep. You were making my life married a misery. And even when I've been bringing up my child, even recently, I mean, anyone can say that every now and again, every 3 months, regularly, my name would be in the paper, Vice Queen, da-da-da-da-da-da. No one came to me. And it would be dreadful. I would have to walk in the street, and obviously people would stare at you, because of this. You can't blame ordinary people. But the press just made my life a misery. It was awful for my son. It was awful for me. It would take me 3 months to recover from people staring at me in the street, from your archives of something that happened 25 years ago, and bang, it would happen again. I had to just take my life into my hands and have some control over my life, and you pressmen, quite honestly, to stop this just continuing each month.
What about 25 years ago, though? Did you enjoy it then? Was there
I've never enjoyed it. I've never enjoyed it. Every marriage, my first marriage was just to an ordinary chap, and they plagued me then. I sold them the picture to get them to go away. We just came to a deal, just to go away, because I couldn't go out now when they plagued us to get a photograph of the baby.
You could have given them the picture just to go away, though.
Well, I could have given them the picture, but then there again, they were offering the money. So if they were going to have a picture to get rid of them, so I took some money.
So you were able to make some money out of the press too.
Well, I'm making money perhaps now because I have taken my life into my own hands, because as I've told you, I have had to, because the press kept making money out of me.
It's extraordinary.
Few months.
And I'd hate to be in a position where I find myself defending some of the methods of the tabloid press. I like the way the big papers are called the quality press, and the rest of you are called tabloids. But, it seems to me that whoever organised the programme has chosen two people to be on that I don't feel guilty about what's happened to them. Harvey Proctor, as I said, he broke the law, and I say that apolitically. And Christine Keeler, you were, if you like, a necessary victim. The stories that appeared 25 years ago were not about you. They were about John Profumo having an affair with a girl who was also having an affair
Of course
with a
I was
Russian.
a scapegoat, but I think most people in this country realise that I was a scapegoat. And now, I mean, there's books turning the whole thing into something totally different, and that is purely political. It's certainly got nothing to do with the reality of what happened.
You in the misfortune of being a central and tangential figure in a story that caught the public's imagination, brought about the downfall of the government, and it's only 25 years ago. Well, it contributed in a large part to it.
It was all a political situation which was neatly piled onto me. I mean, you know, I took the blame. But, you know, I mean, at these new books and what certain members of the press have in mind is to even go beyond that, beyond the media of what was it true or not. They were, you know, they just want to set me up to make up stories, whatever, so they can probably blackmail
That's a
people.
different issue. Making stories up about you is wrong, but wanting to get stories, true stories about you, doesn't seem to me in itself particularly wrong.
Well, the press never come to me. As I've said, I have opened up the papers, read the paper, and wondered who it was they were writing about.
You wouldn't have minded if there'd been a true stories about you.
No, of course not. I have always tried to get the truth out.
Even if your child
but
had
every
had
time
problems.
I do try to get the truth out, it is changed into something else. Because it was political, everything years ago.
If you had
Of course, it
30
nothing to
reporters
do
on your
with
doorstep.
me having anything to do with Jack, if you were Russian naval attaché at the same time, had nothing to do with that.
If you had 30 reporters on your doorstep, all intent on printing the truth.
Yes, and when I had a child, when I was married and trying to get away from it all, and
So it isn't
when I
the
was
30
married for the
journalists you
second
objected
time,
to.
or every time, I had to be a witness. When you go to court and
Juror.
a juror, and it was just so dreadful what I read that you know, Christine Keeler walking along Sloane Avenue, you know, which I happen to live in Chelsea, so I walk along there quite often anyway, as if it was absolutely out of order that I should be walking along Sloane Avenue. I mean, it's just disgusting. And so
Yes, but I don't think describing you walking along Sloane Avenue is disgusting. I think you have to
I shouldn't have been walking along.
Would you,
know,
or
how can
are they saying that, or are you reading that into it?
No,
because
no, that's what was printed. That, you know, I read the newspaper. I couldn't believe it that I'd been a juror. And can you imagine, Christine? And I did actually sort of say that as if I had no right to walk
Yes,
down
but you're setting the
Sloane
picture.
Avenue. Yes,
The
absolutely.
picture is, it's like saying you've got brown hair. It's sort of, you know, walking along Sloane Avenue, setting
No, it
setting
wasn't.
the
It
picture.
wasn't in that. I don't have it with me, but it wasn't in that context. It was sarcastic, as if I had no you know, as if I should not be walking along slow.
I think once the press get their teeth in, then they're never going to let go. But Harvey, I'm sorry, can I at least have a sentence completed without Mr. Peter Hillmore interrupting? I'll give you a number of examples scattered through the evening, some of which took place before the trial, my trial last year, and others afterwards. But at this juncture, let me jump forward in the story and give you one that comes adjacent to Christine Keeler's story just now. That is, after the trial, I thought I'd better go to Harrods to change my account card, to remove my Member of Parliament designation. Of course, the press would have liked to have used a story that I was still using my charge card at Harrods with Member of Parliament on it after the time when I was not. So I went there in company on a Saturday. I think about 3 days later, 2 newspapers reported that I'd been to Harrods. The inference was, clearly, how can I possibly be shopping at Harrods? And that, secondly, I was in the company of a 16-year-old boy. The clear inference was that I was flying in the face of the court judgment. My friend was incredibly flattered. He happened to be over 30. But those papers didn't come to me to ask me for my comments as to what I was doing in Harrods. They took the word of a witness, unnamed, and then printed that story as gospel and got it completely wrong. Now, in the sense, I can accept Mr. Hillmore's argument that up to the trial, perhaps I was a, quote, public personality, quote, a person in authority, unquote. But after the trial, I was nothing. I had no position. And yet the press have continued on that in that vein. And perhaps in the same light, perhaps I can throw in another anecdote of a similar nature. I went for a short break last year because I thought I'd earned it, to Tunisia. And I came back, and I'd been back a fortnight when a newspaper reported that I'd been seen having dinner with urchins in my hotel. Other clear inferences as to what I was about. In fact, I was having dinner with a police officer and the family of a Tunisian diplomat.
Did you object this week, Mr. Proctor, to the press reporting that you're opening a shirt shop and giving a lot of publicity on that for free?
When the Daily Telegraph Peterborough column telephoned me on the Wednesday and asked for my comments, I refused to talk to them. It was only when they had printed the story and the story was out that I felt beholden to put the record straight as to some of their inaccuracies in their story. You see, I've yet to see a story about me that hasn't contained several factual inaccuracies.
Are you opening a shirt shop?
Well, that is one. I'm pleased to say that I am, and I'm going to sell the sort of quality of shirt that I'm wearing tonight, because this is my specimen shirt. What about? I might as well take the opportunity and thank you for the trailer, because in 2 months' time, any of you, and as I said to the Sun reporter this week, even any Sun reporters this week might no shame when it comes to profit. And on the 1st of August, if any of you or any of our viewers tonight wish to come and buy a shirt or a tie in Richmond upon Thames, they're very welcome to do so.
If you were Mr. Ordinary, you would never have had that publicity. You were complaining a few minutes ago that after the trial you'd gone into Harrods when you were a nobody, so why would we still hound you? You're laughing now and plugging your shirt company.
I think I have time to laugh after what's happened to me in the last 2 or 3 years, and you were partly responsible.
Yeah.
But let me ask
if I'm coming there on whether I was partly responsible or not, I was in fact doing a totally different story on Rent Boys when your name kept cropping up. I was doing the story on Harvey Proctor. The chap who told me about Harvey Proctor said, oh, and by the way, I had an awful incident with Harvey Proctor. Sorry, the chap that told me about Russell Harty. And he said, do you want to know about this as well? And I said, of course. We didn't go seeking, the News of the World did not seek stories on you. The stories actually came to us through other things. I mean, we certainly weren't hounding you initially. I think it was the Sunday People.
Well,
This is so
well,
awful
we've
that
probably
you
see come to
take
in
the word
detail.
of people that want to make a few bob, you know. And
No, in fact, we didn't. I actually left messages on
and
your
you
answer
don't
machine,
talk to
Harvey.
the person that it's...
I did. I left several messages on Harvey's answer machine. I never, ever received a reply.
Well, there
well,
you
can
are,
I just
but they still
butt in
printed
there?
your story.
Because I have 2 answer phones, and I never received a message from you, although I did receive messages from tens upon tens of reporters over the months and weeks, and I believe, courteously, because none of the press attacked me for discourtesy, in every case where I received a message, I telephoned the reporter back, even if it was to say that I had nothing to say.
Well, I left
But
messages
in
on
your
phone
case, on neither of my phones, because I've checked my records and I've kept voluminous evidence and records, on no occasion did you leave a message, you personally, under your name.
Well,
I know that you go in undercover, perhaps you go undercover in different non-diplomas, etc., but in your name, I've checked my records and no message was left on either of my 2 answer phones. So, you see, you say, I think your view is that before you print a story, you would always check it out, wouldn't you? Always check it out.
Yeah.
Never an occasion. Right. Well, it just so happens tonight that I was looking through some papers. I didn't know that you were going to be on this programme until about 5 o'clock.
Actually, I think I do know the one you mean, this one.
And here I have in my hand, there we are, a story. And it's from the News of the World on the 12th of April 1987. Just, in fact, before I was going to court. It was before the court. The matter was before the court. And I was under a legal injunction to say nothing. Otherwise, I would be in trouble with the court. So I couldn't comment on this issue at this time, because it was between the charges being laid and my appearance in court, and I could say nothing. But you wrote a story which said, a former male lover of right-wing Tory, that's me, is believed to have the killer disease AIDS. Now blonde bachelor Proctor's worried pals are trying to persuade him to take an AIDS test. And then you went on with other comments, and you say, and one friend revealed, we're very worried for Harvey. The other man has lost a lot of weight, and though he's only 30, he looks really old and haggard. Now, I checked my records, having seen this and hearing that you were on this programme. You never tried to get a quote from me on that occasion.
I can defend that in the sense that I remember that story well. It came out on a Friday night. I wrote it very, very late on a Friday night, charged into the office with it early on the Saturday morning, and then went on another story. That, unfortunately, was left to somebody else to do. I certainly left you. The only number I had for you was your Fulham flat.
Well,
I can only defend me on that.
Yes. How
But-
convenient for passing the buck.
Yeah, having said that,
convenient for passing the buck. This was under an exclusive under your name.
And that story I later discovered to be wrong, which I will admit now. In fact, I met the person who was believed to be the person who had AIDS.
Oh, right. And so
what is
you're telling your viewers now that the story, there's no basis in that story.
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is, at that point, I picked up that story from an extremely good source, a very, very reliable source I've been using for some time.
Yes. And how long after this occasion did you realise that it was completely felonious and false?
Probably about 4 months later.
Right. And did you, in the same page and in the same headings and in the same length, put it right?
No.
Thank you.
Nobody asked me to.
Can I say that the press have got to realise that, like the members of the press, people who happen to sort of take on their time and energy in public life are actually flesh and blood, you know. And we do have families, and we do have friends. And the sort of rubbish that you wrote at that time was deeply hurtful to me, deeply offensive to me, and deeply hurtful to my mother, my brother, my family, and my friends. It was a disgraceful article to write when a man was down. You stuck your stiletto heel into somebody when he was down. He was going to the court, but you had to wring the last drop of blood out of that corpse that was going to that court.
It was a very reliable source at the time, one that had never let me down before.
And you've done nothing to put it right until... And tonight you weren't going to come on this programme to put it right. You knew that. You'd had an opportunity to make your point clear and to put it right at the start of this programme, to apologise.
I've just held up my hands now and said,
because I happen to have got to hand the cutting that proved your lie. But I'm grateful to you.
Yeah.
I'm grateful to you because at least under pressure you've put it right.
Okay.
That's more than many of your other colleagues in the press.
As a follow-up to that, I could have actually done another story on you some months later.
Yep.
That involved a torture chamber, or that was how it was described to me. It was a fairly revolting piece of leather about the size of a double bed, complete with chains and manacles. The person wanting to sell us that, a friend of yours, friend in quotes,
Yes, right.
wanted to sell us that for quite an amazing amount of money.
Yes.
We actually had the torture chamber in our office. We took pictures of it. In fact, I've now actually got it in my house. I know.
Now, what are you doing with it?
Nothing. In fact, it's in my cupboard. I'm very embarrassed when I move house next week. The removal men might find it.
Right.
We didn't run that story. You were just coming up in court. We decided not to. We in fact, took a decision that, in fact, was so distasteful and the rest of it. Had we been running that story, obviously we would have had to have come to you about it.
Yes, well, if you had have done, I would have denied it absolutely.
Did you complain to the Press Council about that story, Mr Proctor, as you're fully entitled to, and for that purpose the Press Council is there? And although I have nothing to do with the Sun and disagree with much of its policies, the Mirror Group, which I worked for a long time, had every member of the staff sign a declaration that they would abide by the principles, conduct and rules and decisions of the Press Council. That was open you to complain, did you?
Well, I'm sorry, you see, but had I taken up in the years leading up to the trial and the surroundings of the trial every inaccuracy of the press in every article that appeared at that time, I would have been forever writing to the Press Council and not doing what I was elected to do, and that is to represent my constituents to the best of my ability. Now, you see, getting back to Peter Hillmore's point towards the beginning of the programme, no one in the press ever said that anything that I did in my private life in any way made me any the less an effective Member of Parliament or in any way got in the way of the work that I did for my constituents. In fact, not before the trial, but after the resignation, I noticed a few crocodile tears in the press where they said just the reverse, and started at that time, once they realised I'd resigned, quoting my constituents that I'd been rather effective as a constituency Member of Parliament. I'm not talking about the political side of it now, and of course we all have our different political opinions, and that's quite right and proper. Some idea of acceptance of another person's point of view is part and parcel of the nature of our parliamentary democracy, and that I fully support. But I don't think the press up to the time of the trial actually let some of my constituents speak in terms of the work I'd done in the constituency. And none of the press could say, whatever was going on in my private life, which I regarded to be utterly personal, nothing to do with anybody else, utterly personal, purely on a voluntary basis, no one got in the way until the press started their stirring and aggressive activities. And what they did, I believe, was quite monstrous. And I would not wish any other person to go through that, because I went through hell for well over a year.
Are you saying you should still be an MP, that you've been so badly treated, that the outcome has been, here you are, your life is shattered and you've got to open a shirt shop? I mean, are you saying that this shouldn't have happened, that you should still be an MP? Is that what you're saying?
I resigned. I pleaded guilty in court.
But are you saying that you should still be an MP?
And I paid my fine. I'm saying that many of my constituents subsequently wrote to me to say that that was the case.
Can I ask Myskow a question? I mean, she's been listening for a while. She's been, as it were, on both sides. recently. What happened?
Well, I was in Fleet Street for nearly 10 years, and the last 3 years, until last July, I was a television critic on the News of the World. I've never been an investigative reporter. I've never done news stories. I've never been interested in news. I've done features, and for 5 years was a television critic. And the last 2 or 3 years, I have myself appeared on television from time to time, mostly in the role of a critic on a programme called New Faces, which deals with new talent. And have somehow got a reputation as being tough. I mean, I call the bitch on the box and all that nonsense. I left Fleet Street after a brief spell on the Daily Express, but I suppose I really left last July when Wendy Henry arrived to edit the News of the World. And, you know, sometimes I think life is too short and you have to really make up your mind what you're going to do when you're faced with working for someone for whom you have no respect at all. And I had a 5-minute conversation with her and decided that I didn't want to work for her. I didn't like her methods, and I didn't want to be any part of it. So I left, rather acrimoniously, because I had a year's contract. I subsequently went to the Daily Express and then left Fleet Street altogether. Now, about 3 weeks ago, as part of my television performance, if you like, I was asked to go and, it's a very silly story, go and be a judge on a Mr. Telethon contest. The Telethon was a huge charity event that lasted 27 hours at the end of last week. And it was a bit of fun. It was a male beauty contest, which is a wonderful revenge for women to go and judge men the way women have been judged for so many, well, centuries, really. Anyway, it took place in Cornwall. It was a bit of fun. There was a daft party afterwards. Everybody jumped into a swimming pool in T-shirts, jumped into a jacuzzi, and I eventually jumped into bed with one of the contestants, Mr. STV. Nothing important in that. I mean, I can't imagine how anybody would even want to comment other than the fact that he was 20 years younger than me. I'm 42, he was 22. And I thought nothing more about it. I'm not married, he's not married. Until I got a phone call about 10 days ago from somebody from News of the World, very late one night, asking, did I know some Carlo something or other? Well, to be perfectly honest, I tried to stall. I mean, you would, wouldn't you? I'd said, oh, entirely unmemorable, without actually lying. And, of course, I remembered the contest, and, of course, I remembered the hotel, and, of course, I remembered all of that. However, it transpired that they had what they called a sworn affidavit from this bloke. And that was the end of that. So I rang the news desk, with whom I had worked very happily for 3 years, and said, all right, I slept with this chap. So what? I mean, I don't see, where is the story? I mean, if it had been the night before the contest and he subsequently won, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, that's a small story, but I don't understand it. And they said, but we're going with it anyway. I said, well, fine. Well, will you at least do me the honour of giving me the right of reply? Will you read me the copy? So at least I can reply. Tell me what he said. A sworn affidavit is one thing, but if you pay somebody money, they can say what they like. And after all, in a situation like that, it's only one person's word against another. There are only two people in a bedroom. Well, in this case, there were. Having told me they would do this, I gave them lots of sort of funny quotes, including one which said that if you think I can pull something that looks like that, then it must give hope to every overweight, over 40-year-old woman in the world. Other things like, they asked me what he was like in bed, and I said, well, he was Italian, and I said, but as far as I couldn't remember much, as far as I could remember, there was just the one cornetto, and various other daft comments like that, thinking, well, it's such a stupid story, and I'm not anybody important, why on earth will they run it? And all during the next day, the Saturday, when they were going to read me the copy, they stalled and stalled and stalled and stalled. And I still couldn't think it was going to be anything awful. And finally, about 20 minutes before the first edition went off stone, I got through to the news editor. And I said, you promised to read me the copy. And he in some ways, he is an honourable man. He decided to read it to me. And
he was so embarrassed by it, he could barely get through it. He was stumbling. He was saying, and there's more like that. And I said, no, you read every word, because it was really embarrassing for me. Where is the story? I mean, this word said, I went to bed with Nina Myskow and it was wonderful. There's no story. So he was saying, he didn't fancy me. Undressed, I looked like a large naked whale or something. I mean, out of a score of 1 to 100, he gave me -10, which is, it's not going to bring down, Christine, the collapse of governments, but it is, on a personal level, it's a deeply embarrassing thing. Well, I coped with it I think I coped with it very well. It was quite a shock to see myself on the front page of the News of the World, a paper which I worked for 3 years. TV bitch dragged me into her bed. I mean, it was hilarious when you think about it. Absolutely hilarious. I mean, what on earth did it matter? And I must say, the next morning when I looked at it and faced it again, it seemed to me so stupid. I've subsequently discovered from lots of friends in Fleet Street that no other paper would have touched it. It is a non-story. And it seems to be more than just coincidence that I was a journalist who worked for the News of the World and refused to work for the current editor. It may have been foolish of me, but I gave an interview to Q magazine, for instance, which came out, I think the issue came out was March. And I had been asked about why I'd left the News of the World and about various other things. And I described a scene with Miss Henry when we were discussing my television column, the 5 minutes where I decided I wasn't going to work for her. And I finished up by saying about Wendy, well, lack of scruples is one thing, darling, but working for someone who wears an ankle chain is just too demeaning for words. Well, all right, it's a bitchy comment, but in fact it's true. I didn't even like her clothes. How can you work for someone with whom you like nothing? Anyway, I'm told that magazine was lurking around the office last week. I mean, it adds up to me. I mean, The Sun told me that they wouldn't have used it. And I've had, I mean, if even The Sun won't use it, my God, who's going to use it? Various other friends in Fleet Street have said that almost to a man they are appalled that if you like Fleet Street should turn on one episode. It's not an important thing, but it happened to me.
However, the Sun did follow
yes,
it up.
Absolutely, The Sun did follow it up.
Quite a large piece.
Absolutely. I tell you, exactly. I know that was an old photograph.
Oh, was it?
An old photograph.
It's hard to work out what we're talking about, because Harvey has complained that the stories were inaccurate, and it's a bit much to hear your explanation that you didn't have time to check it out.
No, I was going to
What I'm trying to say,
checked it out.
my point is that, are you objecting to stories being inaccurate, which is fair enough, and there's no excuse for papers printing inaccurate stories, or are you objecting to the printing of the story themselves? If you had taken a 16-year-old boy to Harrods, if you had had dinner in Tunisia with urchins, would you have objected to the paper printing it?
I think it would depend on the nature and the content of the stories that are set forward. I think that I think the press are quite at liberty to print stories about people in public life if their private life gets in the way of their public performance of their duties. And I would think that that happens in every other country of the world. But I think this country is rather het up about sex, where other countries are not. And you only have to sort of look at every Sunday's News of the World, People, Mirror, the Sunday Mirror, to see that it is focusing in on sex, and yours was a sexual story. What I didn't get out of Nina Myskow's account was whether it had damaged her. She was upset. She used the phrase, and then almost bit it back, unheard of for the press to turn on one of their own. Because, well, I'm pleased you say that, because I wonder whether the people who write these stories actually know the hurt that they can actually do and the damage that they can actually do to somebody's lives. And we've had some incredible examples in recent
yes, but it depends
weeks and years.
on how you handle it and how you cope with it. I mean, Christine, if you like, was a victim 25 years ago, and she still is a victim. Now, you can't blame everybody for that. I mean, I in no way want to diminish what's happened to you and your life by comparing it with mine, or the foolish thing that's happened to me in the last week, because in the grand scheme of things, it's not important. But if I looked at it a different way, it could have been very damaging to me mentally. It could have shattered my self-confidence. I mean, I have weight problems. To be called a great naked whale is not what I want to hear. Now, I've managed to get...
Yes. Did you hate working for the News of the World as TV critic when they were turning over other people?
I didn't enjoy that part of it, I must say.
Didn't you feel...
If you objected to being called fat, weren't you in a High Court action where an actress sued you for saying she had a big backside?
Absolutely.
Well, then you... Well, what the hell?
No.
We take it, if we dish it out.
Absolutely, and I've taken it, and what I'm saying is, you have to take it, and I have taken it, but it's how you take it, and how you get on with the rest of your life, and how you come to terms with it. Now, for me, I knew that the only way I could deal with something that could basically damage my self-confidence, nothing more than that, couldn't damage my career in any way, wasn't damaging anybody else's career, was to handle it with humour, was to rise above it with humour, which I have done. So when the Sun came to me on Tuesday and said, the editor said, I absolutely loved your quotes at the end of that feature. It was the only thing that made it worth reading. They were very funny. And I think it's great. There you are, a single woman over 40, living your own life, pulling toy boys if you want or not, and answering to nobody. And I'm sure lots of women must envy you. I want to do a feature like that. And I said, well, isn't it a bit tacky? And he said, well, of course it's tacky. It's tabloid. But also, it's a bit of fun, and it's a chance for you to say exactly what was right and what was wrong about that piece. So I thought about it and did it. And
sounds like a pop song. Of course it's tacky, it's tabloid.
Absolutely. We should write it, Peter, and perhaps we'd have a hit with it. Probably you singing, not me.
Is that how you spend your life, Lester?
Well, yes. I mean,
tacky tabloid?
Not necessarily tacky tabloid, but certainly writing about show business celebrities. And if details of their private life are revealed to me, I, like Annette, would confirm any story with the person that I was speaking to. But
how do you make sure you don't appear like Nina?
That I don't appear like Nina? Well, I mean, to flatter Nina, she's actually far more important than I am, because in fact now she is a television celebrity. She is on New Faces. People know her, and people are interested in reading about her. And I'm sure that it's not going to do her television career, if that is in fact what she's going to be pursuing, any harm whatsoever. I mean, I certainly don't think she is a victim. I don't think Nina would regard herself as a victim either.
No, I don't regard myself as a victim, but I was a potential victim if I'd allowed it to get to me.
After a few months, it'll just wear off.
Well, it's worn off already. It's absolutely worn off already.
But I've had to put up with that for 25 years.
And it's a funny dilemma about private and public life, especially in show business, because when famous people complain about the press interfering in their private life, it doesn't mean they want to keep their private life entirely private. They want to control what's written about it. I mean, I have seen interviews in Woman's Own, for example, in which Nigel Lawson's wife will talk about my life at number 11 and give her day, what she does, what they eat, etc., reveal her private life. And yet, people like her will get annoyed if details of their private life, which they don't want to reveal, come out. And it seems to me you can't have it both ways. You either lead a monumentally private life, or you go to Langan's, or you go to fashionable restaurants, and you get written about.
I mean, there are actors and particularly talking about show business now, there are actors and actresses who do not give interviews to the press. And it is usually those actors and actresses who do not, for want of a better word, get turned over in the press. I mean, there are a lot of very respectable actors that we think of, Sir Michael Hordern, etc., that nobody would be interested in writing a sensational story about his private life. But an actor or an actress, perhaps from one of the soap operas, who comes to the press and says, write about me, I'm in a new soap opera, and I want as much publicity as possible to make the soap opera successful, to boost my earnings as a performer, can not then turn round and complain if in fact some unsavoury or whatever
Well,
details
Ms. Keeler has
of their
repeated
private life
18
comes
times
out.
that she's a victim for 25 years and all this stuff. She said in the beginning that her life story, in respect to our chairman, her life story, as we know, started when somebody fired a shot at her. What did anything to do with the press, those wicked people, Miss Keeler, that lucky your boyfriend started firing off guns outside your... An associate. An associate began firing guns out. Was that to do with the press?
This man was never my boyfriend anyway. What I said was that when this man did fire a gun at me, the press just lived on my doorstep day in and day out. And the same with when I had a child or when I got married or any of these things happen. I didn't sell you a story, did I? We just had to get rid of you, get you out of our property, just living out there. But you mentioned the press council before, and quite honestly, the press council, it's a waste of money writing to them because they don't do anything. They're absolutely powerless.
Absolutely.
They don't do a thing.
Couldn't agree more.
Really, it's the press council is just nothing. It's a waste of time.
I want to agree with you,
writing.
and during my many years in Fleet Street, the latter years when the press council was really going, any decent reporter, tabloid particularly, who worked for me, and I was a news editor, who got a press council condemnation of a medium kind, would be a marked man. If he did anything more again, he'd likely be very serious.
Wendy
and if he had a
Henry.
bad mark, he'd be out.
Hang on, Wendy Henry admits that when she wrote in The Sun, she made up an interview with a Falklands war victim, concocted a story.
Yes,
she said she was suspended for a month, and such was the shock of her employers, so embarrassed was the news editor, so horrified was her editor, and so shattered was her proprietor that they promoted her to edit the News of the World.
We're talking again, Peter, about The Sun, which we've had an example over there. I think that is one particular group.
And the News of the World.
That group.
Hang on.
Which is bad on press.
Let's not pretend that the whole of Fleet Street are a bunch of selfless, dedicated people with very high standards who will punish you if you get something wrong. I mean, we've heard the explanation of Annette that she left early, too late.
No, I did actually say that I'd actually left
somebody else. You didn't have time
else.
to check a story.
No, somebody else was supposed to check
We all
that
get
story.
things wrong. But
I held my hands up and admitted to that one.
No, but
I did actually
Can I just add a little story
Harvey's
to
number,
here? Is that so? Another fool. My life is filled with foolish incidents, which are nevertheless great fun from time to time. Some time ago, I was invited onto a live program called Central Weekend, which goes out in the Midlands area, and it was absolutely chaotic, and it was filmed in a nightclub, and at the end of which there was a strippogram girl. It was supposed to be the whole party atmosphere, and she was so repellent and kept sort of shoving herself forward and stripping off. This was bad enough, but her manager was standing behind us and kind of stage managing. Go on, lean forward, push your boobs out. Now get the agency card down your front, do all of this. And nobody was stopping this. And I was absolutely so horrified to be part of this that the only thing I could possible was to pick up wine and pour it over her. And a sort of daft sort of wine flinging thing ensued. But I felt you couldn't make a verbal protest. It was such chaos. Anyway, Annette, I'm sorry to say that when I came to the News of the World the next day, they said, we want to feature, we think it's a daft story, we'd like to. Now, Annette, you were asked to write it.
Mm-hmm. And I disagreed with the principle of writing it.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. You came to my office, I told you exactly what happened, and you wrote it. I had to spend half an hour in the afternoon putting it factually correct, standing over the subs, what you'd written up. You made it sound more fun. You'd actually whooped it all up. And I'd talked to you, for 20 minutes, and you'd taken notes, and what came out, I'd said to another journalist, it wasn't what I'd said. It wasn't what had happened. And I didn't want to embarrass you by making you rewrite it, because I'm not your employer. I wasn't your employer then. I just was another journalist from the same paper. But I had to spend a lot of time getting it back down to what it actually was.
Well, certainly you didn't complain to me at the time. But, at the time I remember saying to everybody, God, why on earth are we writing a story about one of our own staff?
That's not the point. That's not the point. I'm saying you wrote it up. Yeah. You made it sound more raunchy, more something, more whatever.
But I think whenever you see
Why? Why didn't you just do it like I said it? Like, print the quotes I told you. That's funny enough.
Boring the way
Funny
you said
enough. No, I'm sorry. Listen, nobody's ever accused me of being boring.
No,
I felt
because
it was
I
a
don't mean.
non-story.
No, I meant the story was boring.
I know.
The former Sun journalist who objected to an inaccurate story.
I've never actually misquoted anybody in my entire career, and I defy anyone to find a piece of copy that does that.
There's certainly backbiting in Fleet Street. We've heard quite a considerable amount of it
We're deeply concerned.
tonight. I think it's the hypocrisy that I can't stand
Yes,
most
please.
about it. At the time of the Jeffrey Archer scandal in the News of the World, Robert Maxwell made a statement that was carried in certain editions of his Sunday papers, that he, on behalf of his papers, the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, and the Daily Mirror, would never allow his papers to pay money to prostitutes, tape private telephone conversations, and wire people for sound. At exactly the same time that he was making those statements on behalf of his papers and his group, his reporters were doing exactly the same things in my case. They were taping my private telephone conversations. They were paying prostitutes for stories. And they were wiring people for sound to come into my flat as agents provocateurs. And indeed, coming now into, again, responding to some of Mr. Hillmore's comments, perhaps in a bad order, but as it falls into that. One of the two people about whom I was charged, who turned out to be a 19-year-old, I have only met on 2 occasions. I met him once in my flat when he claimed to be over 21. And the second occasion, when he came to my flat, was when he'd been wired for sound by a Sunday People newspaper reporter. And he lied again on tape about his age on that occasion. The only occasion when I knew his age, his correct age, was on the day of my charge, when the day I was charged. On the day I was arrested by the police at my flat, that person had made no statement to the police at all. And I was not knowledgeable as to who he was. It was only on the day of my charges, and following those charges, a brief conversation with my solicitor, Sir David Napley, that I concluded that I had indeed committed offences. And on the legal side of it was that there is a difference in the treatment of the law from the homosexual to the heterosexual case. This is no defence, and I don't put it forward as such, but it was my understanding, even as a Member of Parliament, my understanding, that if you had a private sexual act with another man who was under the age of 21, but you thought he was over 21, and the jury would reasonably assume that he was over 21, then you had a defence. That is the law with regard to the heterosexual case with the girl aged 16. A man has sexual intercourse with a girl under the age of 16 but genuinely believes she's over 16, and a jury believes that that is reasonably the case to hold.
Just a moment. We were away at a commercial break, and you were talking about discovering evidence by virtue of someone having been wired for sound. Perhaps you could fill us in a little bit more on that. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Right, I'm not quite sure where in the narrative I got to, but I think I was talking about a person who came into my flat wired for sound. He came in wired for sound. That person I met on 2 occasions. On the first occasion, I believed him to be over 21, and he claimed to be over 21. On the second occasion, when he came as an agent provocateur, armed with the People tape recorder stuffed down his trousers or wherever, he again lied on tape, and I believed him to be over 21. But I then went on to point out in the commercial break that the law is different in the heterosexual case to the homosexual case. That if a man believes that a person is over 21, but it's subsequently found that he's actually under 21, then you commit an offence. Whereas in a 16-year-old girl, and the age of consent is different, 16 and 21, if a man has sexual intercourse with a girl under the age of 16, but he genuinely believes she's over 16 and a jury concurs, then he has a defence. No such defence was available to me. I believed it was. Right the way up to the day I was charged, I believed that I had a defence.
I think for the sake of public information,
Right.
I think only until he reached a certain age himself, I think my knowledge of the law is until he's 24 or 25. Thereafter, that defence isn't available. That's drawing on my own knowledge.
I think that a Law Commission report did look at this lacuna in the law and recommended that action should be taken to rectify that position. But it did not occur. But I genuinely believed, until the day I was charged, that I had committed no offences. Therefore, what had I been concerned with in the run-up to that point, i.e. the day I was charged with the offences? It was that I thought it was no business of the press to know whether I was a homosexual or not. And why was that? Because I didn't believe it had any difference at all to the work that I did as a Member of Parliament on behalf of my constituents. I didn't think that in the work that I was doing for my constituents, whether I was a homosexual or not, made any difference. And yet the media went on and on and on, and with respect, Mr. Hillmore, it wasn't really about offences. It was about whether or not they'd found a Conservative Member of Parliament who was a homosexual. Now, we all know, sitting around here, of course we do, that I was not the only Member of Parliament, or Conservative Member of Parliament, who was a homosexual, or still is a homosexual. And yet I was the one. I was
the MP for Islington, who's come out and admitted
yes, I just said that.
No harassment.
Yes.
No, he has no harassment
yes,
of the press.
Right. You've answered your own question. The harassment was because of my political views and the stance I'd taken on immigration and race relations. Because it had not happened. It didn't happen. It didn't happen in the others. And
tell me about using.
You've answered your own question, Mr. Hillmore.
And recordings. Have you ever done that?
Yeah, I have. One example.
Can you tell us about?
Yeah, Russell Harty, who I certainly went through lots of soul searching on at the time. It was just after the Jeffrey Archer case, when we found a rent boy who said, I've had an affair with Russell, well, I've slept with Russell Harty. He gave us a sworn affidavit. That's not enough. You know, there has to be more than that. We had to convince ourselves for a start.
Can I move you off Russell Harty, who's after all not very well at the present moment? Perhaps we ought not to talk about him. Can you perhaps move to the more general point about the use of such recordings? Do you think that that's an appropriate way to get information?
It was. I have to go back to that case as the example. It was appropriate there because we had to convince ourselves that the rent boy actually knew him. So we had to send the rent boy in, taped up to his house, just to simply go in and say hello. When he knocked on the door, Russell Harty greeted him with a kiss on the lips, and they had a chat for 5 minutes. Once he came out of the house, we picked him up, went off, played the tape. That convinced us that the two knew each other. Very often I've used a tape recorder simply as a backup. Forgetting scandal stories in the sense of sort of well-known people, old-fashioned News of the World style stories when we used to go off and do massage parlours, simply because the people running them, the evil's there. If I was to go into somewhere and what they would do, I only did 3 of these, would send me to apply for a job as a masseur. We were never after the girls, we were generally after the people running it. And I could have walked in there and they could have said, oh, right, this is what we want you to do. We want you to, in fact, pretend you're a masseur, but in fact you've got to offer, sort of your services, and say it's £25 for full sex or whatever else. Now, I could have walked out of there, I could have forgotten half of the information. Also, it was my word against theirs. So I'd take a tape recorder and put it in my bag as an extra backup. Because 9 times out of 10, the police would become involved after a story like that. And that would be some of our evidence.
Well, we're talking about going into massage parlours undercover and pretending to be told. All this is very low level and very true. There's nothing wrong with a bit of honest vulgarity. But I must put in a word for some very major social investigations which have resulted in changes of the law by Parliament and, for example, the jailing of 16 top Scotland Yard officers, which have been the result of newspapers which I've been concerned with using undercover methods and using tape recorders. In the case in 1975 of 16 top yard officers, including 2 commanders, being jailed for corruption which an Old Bailey judge described as from the top to bottom at Scotland Yard, involving the payment of many thousands of pounds a week to police of those days by pornographers in this country. That was all obtained completely by undercover methods and deception. Involved, example for even the crux of the story, involved the then head of the flying squad, who's now dead, rest his soul, who'd had a holiday abroad paid for by London's chief pornographer, a man called Humphreys. All their wives had been together to Cyprus, and there's the head of the flying squad having a free holiday with London's biggest pornographer. Well, we obtained, or Sunday people it was then, obtained a great deal of information about this, but of course it has to be copper bottom. There's no question of just hearsay on a thing like that. It would cost 10 million quid in libel damages if wrong, and it would also be very wrong to publish if wrong. So what did we do? The only proof to be obtained was to get the travel holiday firm's bill to prove who had paid for the holiday. Had the Soho crook paid for the flying squad chief's free holiday with his missus and all the rest? Had to get the proof. Only documentation would do in such a big case as that. And it was of public importance that the head of the world's most famous flying squad, if he had, was on a freebie with an ex-Dartmoor prisoner who now ran Britain's porn rackets. What did we do? We hired an actor who looked, could call him an actor, who looked like Commander Drury. We found the travel firm who had arranged the holiday, and we sent this chap in saying he was Commander Drury and asking for a copy of the account for his tax purposes. The travel agency coughed up a complete copy which showed, indeed, that the holiday of the Yard's flying squad chief abroad had been paid for by Britain's top pornographer. Result, big story, big investigations, 16 police jailed, praised by judge, clean up of Scotland Yard, appointment of Sir Robert Mark. That was a worthy cause of undercover.
Yes. What do you think about their causes that you've just heard of?
No, I don't think that the small tatty cases are old-fashioned, unless you've got some kind of big operator who is bringing in many women and exploiting them, girls or young girls or something like that. It's not justified. I mean, who doesn't know what goes on in massage parlours? That's not
people
news,
like examples were sort of David Sullivan, who later went on to run Sunday Sport. And
but you can't expose David Sullivan for that. He already has a conviction for
this is many years ago. In fact, I was going to the Star when Sunday Sport or David Sullivan took it over. I handed my notice in the same week as Nina. At that point, I actually changed my mind when David Sullivan took it over, because I got the cuttings out from the News of the World of I don't know, 15 years before, and discovered to my horror what this man was like. I didn't go. Once Express newspapers pulled out of the Sunday Sport deal, I then went back to the Star.
So are we talking about the methods that newspapers use to get stories, or are we talking about the stories they actually get? I mean, is the disapproval I can certainly sense on Harvey that tape recorders are used, or is it because they're only used on minor stories? I mean, when I took over the Guardian diary, the editor, Peter Preston, who used to write the diary himself and spoke very cryptically, said, "You can write what you like, but never use a howitzer to shoot a pygmy if you are going to shine the searchlight of a great national newspaper, etc., etc., onto somebody. Make sure they are worthy of that, otherwise the public will feel sorry." Now, I would argue that Harvey was not a pygmy. I would argue that his private life did encroach upon his public life because he was a Tory MP, and we know the policies of the Tory party as regards to
that's
morality.
not good enough. You've got to explore my own views, not the party's
No, no,
views.
because you were upholding, you were a symbol
You represent
of
the party.
the Tory party. I mean, you were not, you were partly chosen because of your perhaps amazing talents as a politician, and also because you stood for the Tory party, and people voted Conservative and ended up with you. They didn't vote for you and ended up with a Tory
but
MP.
The Tory party is a broad
What I'm trying
church,
to-
isn't
no,
it?
no,
With
hang
a
on.
mixed review, a wide spectrum of view, and a wide spectrum of view on a number of subjects. The trouble with the press is that they like to label you. And people like Mr. Hillmore and his ilk like to put labels on politicians.
No, but it's not
because it actually, even for a heavy newspaper, they like to label you.
But Harvey,
right,
it's not that you're homosexual, because
no,
I
the
I
label,
think the Cecil
you see,
Parkinson
the label
quite
was
right to
right
reveal
wing.
his
The label, and I'm not
rampant
talking about homosexual.
homosexuality.
The label that you put up on me was right wing. Now,
You are right-wing, for heaven's sake.
well, your ignorance, you see, sort of counts. One might be regarded as right-wing on some things, but not on others. And you see, but you want to generalise on everything. On immigration, race relations, perhaps in a political spectrum, I might be regarded as on the right wing, although I regard myself to be just right on that subject and believe the vast majority of the British people support my views. They certainly did in my constituency.
What are you
But,
left-wing on?
but,
What
but,
are you
on,
left
but
on?
on other subjects, on social affairs, on mental health, and the most rewarding work I did in the House of Commons didn't get mentions in Fleet Street, a little bit in my local press, but not much mention in the qualities or the tabloid press, was the hours of work I spent on mental health, which I thought was incredibly rewarding. I sat on the committee of the bill that recast mental health legislation in this country for 20 or 30 years before it had been touched, and I enjoyed that work. And I might have been regarded, or was regarded, I think, as being on the left of those particular issues and other social issues. And on the common market, are you right-wing if you're anti-common market? I happen to be anti-common market, but then I have very similar views to Mr. Wedgwood Ben on the common market. And yet the press don't want to get into that detail. They want a label. And so they labelled it, the label I attracted was right-wing, and therefore I suppose that when the personal difficulties started to overtake, journalists assumed that if he was a right-winger on immigration, therefore presumably he might be a right-winger on other matters, including, for example, homosexual reform. But if they looked at the record, my voting record on homosexual reform, they would realise that on the 2 occasions it came before the House, I voted in favour of extending the legalisation of homosexuality to those over 21, to Scotland and to Northern Ireland. So there's no hypocrisy there.
I want to ask Nina, I mean, it worries me that I find myself defending some newspapers that I have absolute loathing for. I mean, when you were on The Sun and Kelvin, they made up the interview with Mrs. Mackay.
I wasn't on The Sun in those days.
Oh,
I went on The Sun from...
So you joined subsequent to that?
I went on The Sun from
Crikey.
1978 to 82, then I joined the Sunday People from 82 to 84.
Right.
84 to 87, I was with the News of the World.
Okay, so what do you feel about The Sun, which is after you left and your influence was no longer there, made-up interviews, makes-up stories. You have worked, there must have been stories in the News of the World that, when you were on it, that made your stomach curl.
Absolutely, yes.
And did you find it easy to stay on it?
Well, it's very easy to say, well, you should just have resigned if there was something about a newspaper that you didn't like. But you must remember that, for instance, a lot of journalists are very left-wing and work for right-wing newspapers. We are professionals.
Oh, so honest journalists can work for lying newspapers, and that's by the same left-wing can work for right-wing papers.
I think you have to. There has to be some sort of compromise. I mean, if everybody was to say, "I don't agree with this story, I'm going to resign," there's be no staff on
No, a
any
story that's
newspaper.
manifestly untrue. I don't mean a story you disagree with its tone, a story that is a lie from start to finish.
I was never aware of, to be perfectly honest, when you reach the point of columns, as you know, you are on a kind of ivory tower. You are.
But you read it.
You read it, but you may not know whether it's
But
true or not.
You know when another newspaper reveals it. You know, you discover that you're working. And I remember when there was a demonstration outside the Sun, and when the Sun was just round the corner from the Observer, and when I wrote the Pendennis column, I had a total preoccupation with the Sun, and I wandered around to see the demonstration. And what I noticed was not the demonstrators outside the building, but a notice from the editorial floor. Somebody had stuck a sign up saying, "We work for the Lies Factory."
Well,
so I put it to you that on The Sun, there are very few people who think every story they write has been checked out. Every story they write has been.
I agree, but in the days that I worked there,
that's why you earn so much.
In the days when I worked there, that's.
Ease your
But you see, well, the reason I left The Sun, one of the reasons I left The Sun, wasn't just because I didn't want to continue being a rock writer. I'd become bored with that. It was because I didn't want to work for Kelvin Mackenzie. It took me 9 months to get out of it.
You told me, I remember meeting you at a party, and you told me how nice Kelvin Mackenzie was, and when he said to you, I can remember the story, he said, 'cause it's the first nice thing I've heard about Kelvin Mackenzie, he said to you, if you get a job on another paper, I'll eat my typewriter. And when you left, he had a cake made in the shape of a typewriter, and you were telling me how sweet it was. I remember it well.
I told her how sweet it was, because I had at that point resigned from The Sun. In fact, the story's not quite true, Peter. You haven't got your facts. You haven't remembered quite right. What in fact happened was
Even Mr. Hillmore can get it wrong?
Of course they do.
Slightly wrong.
Oh, journalists get stories wrong.
What
it's a
actually
question
happened
of
was
whether you think they're right when you think they're right when you print them.
I resigned from The Sun. I resigned from The Sun and wanted to get out within 6 weeks rather than the 3 months contract I had. And I did it by adding up all the days off owing to me. Kelvin was very angry about it. We fell out. And it came to my leaving party, and he refused to come. I was rather hurt by that. Somebody you worked with even for 9 months, you want your employer to be there. And the next day I was clearing out my desk, and he arrived there with a big cardboard box, and he said, Nina Myskow, you once said that if so-and-so didn't become the biggest star of the 80s, you would eat your typewriter. Well, have a go at this. And inside was the most beautiful cake. It was a perfect typewriter with everything correct, all the letters, and where it should have said Adler Tipper, it said The Sun in the correct typeface, which I think is a charming gesture. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, I mean, that doesn't mean to say that I wanted to work for Kelvin or that I chose to work for Kelvin. I chose not to.
Defending myself against Harvey's accusations of perfection, I think journalists all make mistakes. They all get stories wrong. It is a question of a lot of journalists on the tabloid know the stories are wrong when they write them. Not every journalist. On The Sun.
You see the extraordinary
take the interview. Hang on, Harvey.
There's a great blackmail trick that the press play on and we're a bit outgunned by the press here tonight. But there's a blackmailing trick, and you all play it. And what you do is you write something, and there are inaccuracies in the article. And perhaps you know there are, and perhaps you don't. And perhaps it's through omission, or perhaps it's through commission. But there are inaccuracies in most reports that I have had any dealings with, that I personally have knowledge of. That makes me wonder about all the rest. But there are errors. You get another reporter who says, I'm not like the one you've just spoken to, or the one you spoke to yesterday, but I've seen what he's had to say. And look, if only you could spare the time to go through his piece and tell me where it's wrong, I'll put it right. But if you don't, they feel upset and believe that you're not telling the truth when you say that the other chap has got it wrong, if you don't correct it. Now, I took the view, because when you have a position, when you get 20 or 30 messages on your answer phone, it takes you some time to, day after day, to deal with that level of press inquiry and press interest, not for a few days, as in your case, but over many years, or in my case, concentrated into about 18 months or 2 years. It gets very wearing indeed to keep going back and going over the same material, just to have some satisfaction that perhaps some newspaper is going to put it right. And, I came to the conclusion the only way one would ever get it right is really if you actually sit down and write the piece yourself, as I did in the Evening Standard magazine last December, and that is word perfect, and I wouldn't take anything away from that. Or alternatively, on a live television programme such as this, because we've rather concentrated on investigative journalism as opposed to the wider area of the media and television. Because television now going away from live television, with the honourable exception of this programme. I wouldn't go on any programme unless it was live. This is one of the few programmes I would appear on. Because it is live, I cannot be edited out. And I've been dreadfully treated by being edited out. And there's the famous Panorama Maggie's Militant Tendency that I featured in, and which, until I ran out of money, I was suing for libel. But thereby editing, as the then chairman of the Conservative Party said after seeing that programme, Harvey, I knew you were many things, but a quick change artist was not amongst them. I appeared in one supposed scene at a meeting, giving a speech, but my clothes, my suit changed 3 times, because they cut bits from one meeting to another and intervened with editing techniques. So the whole thing got they say film doesn't lie, but the editing technique was such of that Panorama programme and that broadcast that it presented a complete travesty of the truth. And it was a political matter, and I do make the distinction about being always ready. I was always ready in the 8 years I was a member to talk about political issues. That's what I was there for, a member of Parliament, to talk about political issues, to accept that other people would have different views, but to concentrate on the political issue and not play the person. The press tried to bring me down by attacking my political views, did not succeed. I was re-elected in 1983, and therefore they decided to play the man. Not all of them, but enough of them to do the damage to mean that I couldn't continue as a member of Parliament. And in the end, they succeeded.
That's an easy prey, because in the last 10 years, I'm not rich, and also I'm a woman on my own, yes. So I've been quite a easy target.
I think it is easier if you have money. We haven't got into the area about I think probably because we are outgunned tonight in terms of the press, well, people say, well, take it to the Press Council. We've dealt with that. Well, but what about libel? Well, some people
You haven't dealt with that. You didn't take it to the Press Council, Mr. Proctor. You didn't even try.
Yeah,
How can you condemn it without you haven't even tried it? And furthermore, I should like to ask you, as you're blaming the press and the politicians for the case and everything that happened to you, why did you plead guilty?
With regard to the Press Council, in fact, I did. So again, there's the ignorance of the press demonstrated again.
You didn't earlier. You said it wasn't worth writing. You hadn't got time to do it.
Can I say that this conversation is a very simple...
The best way, the press, because of prejudice, I had to plead guilty to something, or accept going to prison and pleading guilty when it was the first time in legal history anyone had been sent to prison for not saying who or what was at a scene of crime when a scene of crime took place. But purely because of prejudice, because of what the press had done, I had to agree to admit certain things and go to prison, because the whole case was the public image.
Did the lawyers tell you to plead guilty? Did the lawyers say to you, it's all because of the press, you must plead guilty? Did they?
Because I came to a deal, I suppose, like many people do, that I would go to prison for 6 months if I admitted to 2 charges and the other 2 would be dropped. And the other 2 were, it was a wrongful arrest. I was willing to have those cases dropped because the man could have sued me for my money on top. So I went to prison purely because of public opinion.
You accused people did, the chairman will say, it's known as plea bargaining.
It was the first time in legal history, apparently it happens every day of the week now,
it does.
But in those days, it was the first, I had never been written in a policeman's book, it was the first time in legal history anyone was sent to prison for not saying who or what was at a scene of crime when a scene of crime took place. So the man that actually attacked me went free, and I, the victim, went to prison because of public opinion. And everything out of hand with the courts and things like that. Sure. But I do think that politicians, their private lives are their own, because otherwise it just leaves people open for blackmail. In every other country, as you said, in France, it is ridiculous, this, what a person does in their private life.
In America it's different? What about all the presidential candidates who dropped out because they've been caught shenaniganing?
Can I take up your comments about the Press Council?
Yes,
there seems to be a difference of view about whether I'd said one thing or another. That, if I may say so, is because the press do not listen to what you say or exactly what you say.
They're listening to scum.
We're trying now to get
to them.
to get
Did
our...
you not say, sir, earlier that you did not have time to write letters to the Press Council, you were too busy? When I asked you, did you complain to the Press Council? Did you say that, sir? And would that be normally understood as meaning you had not complained to the Press Council about this story of my colleague? It sounded dreadful and very...
Which I held my hands up to, but
I
yeah.
have complained to the
You didn't
Press
link it,
Council
yeah.
for many, many years, and in fact now my solicitor is just a waste of time and money to even bother to write to them. Because, as you must know, the Press Council will mean absolutely nothing.
I agree with Christine's comments, but I'm still trying to get this point out, that the intransigence of the press, and that they want it all quick, they want it within a second, they're not prepared to listen, you weren't prepared to listen, to hear me out, because you've taken in the information of what has happened in the last few minutes, and what I've said, and what I said before about the Press Council, and you weren't prepared to listen out the sentence. Because the sentence was going to go on when I was talking this time about the Press Council. That in fact,
I wasn't prepared to listen to something you hadn't yet said.
No, there was something...
Harvey is right. Well, I'm still trying to get this point. And if I may, because I've been trying for about 5 minutes now, the point I was about to say, but you cut me off and now I'm about to say it, is that in 1978, before I became a Member of Parliament, I did take a case to the Press Council. But it took something like a year to prove the point. And it was a Press Council case, an adjudication against the Daily Telegraph. We won't go into the details of that, it's not relevant for this argument. But suffice to say, it was a very cumbersome process. It took a long time. It actually the adjudication came out just before the 1979 general election. And I actually won, as a matter of fact. But notwithstanding that, my experience of the Press Council in my own case, and the experience of other people when I was a Member of Parliament dealing with the Press Council led me to believe that that wasn't a sensible way of proceeding. But I was then going on, and I think I started this new tranche of argument about the Press Council by saying there are other ways, namely legal redress, and that is the libel action. But of course, that is really only available to a person with considerable sums of money, with means. And until the law is changed so that legal aid is available for people who want to take a major corporation like Mr. It's an unequal competition, contest if you're taking Mr. Maxwell to court. He has bags of money. I, in my case, Christine has very meagre means. Many other people have got meagre means. Now, of course, you might get a lot of stupid, frivolous actions taking place against newspapers, but there could be a legal mechanism, a legal trigger, and a hearing before a High Court judge to see whether legal aid in that particular case was appropriate or not. But I do think that rather than the Press Council, rather than many of the other suggestions that have been put forward to monitor the press, self-regulation or monitoring of the press, that change in the law with regard to legal aid, with a legal trigger, would be very advantageous from balancing the ordinary man who doesn't have much. I'm conscious of the fact that because of what happened to me and because of the position I held, I'm able thereafter to, if I so wish, to express an opinion. And for that, of course, I'm grateful. I wouldn't, if I was Joe Bloggs, be invited on your programme tonight too. So I'm really talking for all of them too, who've been got at by the press, who don't have the means or the mechanism to actually try and hit back.
I wonder whether I can ask Lester a question. You've heard Laurie and Peter Hillmore seek to occupy what might be called the higher ground, that investigative journalism is all right, providing you look at serious things. You don't do that. How do you justify what you do?
Well, I look at, perhaps, if you look at show business in comparison to major investigations, it might seem trivial, but the world is very occupied with show business. Show business is all around us. This is show business to a certain extent, and I would go and interview somebody, take a tape recorder. I mean, I take a tape recorder to do an interview anyway. But if I was told that something was happening involving a big name in the world of pop or TV or film, and I needed to go in undercover, wired for sound or whatever, I would do it.
Friend?
Hmm?
A friend?
If it was a friend. Probably not, no.
Would you trespass in a house if you had to? Would you break past an elderly lady in her 70s because she'd said her son was not at home and you didn't believe her and you forced your way past her to see whether he was hiding behind the door?
No,
would you
I
do that?
certainly would not.
And would you condone any action by your colleagues for doing that?
No, I certainly would not.
That was done in my case, and I'm sure it's done in many cases by journalists.
And I certainly wouldn't condone
I've
it.
had journalists fighting outside my door, fighting with each other.
I've had journalists ringing my doorbell at 1 a.m. in the morning, and this was from the Sun newspaper, ringing my doorbell at 1 a.m. in the morning and saying, "Mr. Proctor, who are you sleeping with tonight?" And I close the door and I try and get some sleep. And at 7:30, at 7:30, well, they're not the worst. The People, the Mirror, and the Sunday Mirror are the worst, in my case, in my experience. But the Sun on this occasion, at 1 o'clock, they rang the bell. At 7:30, the same reporter with the same photographer rang the bell again, waking me up, and said, "Mr. Proctor, who have you been sleeping with tonight?" Now, I believe that is quite disgraceful and monstrous for that to happen to anyone.
And the irony is, Harvey Proctor's complaints about the Sun mirror his complaints about the Press Council. And there was a time when I observed the whole workings of the Press Council when, at the time that they had an interview with Mrs. Mackay, who was the widow of Sergeant Mackay, who won the VC in the Falklands. It was a totally fabricated interview, and for some reason I got very annoyed about this. And when you write a column, the nice thing about getting annoyed is that you can express it in print.
Yes.
I tried to ring Kelvin Mackenzie, and his office said that Mr. Mackenzie never gives interviews to the press. And I could see his point, knowing what his journalists do. Mrs. Mackay told me that she never spoke to the Sun. I got my secretary, this is my undercover work, I got my secretary writing as a concerned member of the public to complain to the Press Council about this fabricated interview. And I would write the letters for her, and she would show me the correspondence. And the one thing that shines through the sort of 6 months it took before the Press Council ruled was their reluctance to act. They kept writing her letters saying, "You must understand it is very difficult to check these facts. Is it worth carrying it on?" And it's quite likely, had she been just a concerned reader, she would have dropped it. But because she would show me the letters, I would dictate another one to her. It finally happened that the Press Council delivered a stinging rebuke to the Sun, and the Sun had to apologise, etc., etc.
Isn't it
nonetheless,
a fact now,
Press
Peter,
Council
that the Press
didn't want to
Council
get
has an
involved.
accelerated procedure? It's nothing to me. I'm out of journalism now, and I have nothing to do with the Press Council. But for the general public's information, they have an accelerated procedure now for fast complaints. And in both the cases you've mentioned and Harvey's mentioned, the Press Council condemned the paper's
Oh,
complaint.
sure.
And then what was
What I'm
that
trying to
then?
say is that we forced them to condemn.
Oh, you did very well remember your
because
stories,
she
yes.
kept persisting with the letters, because she kept saying, "Why do you not ask Mrs. Mackay whether she gave the interview to the Sun?" If she did give the interview, the Sun was right to print it. If she didn't give an interview, they were wrong to make one up. It was simple. All they had to do was write to Mrs. Mackay. We still got letters back from the Press Council saying, "No, no, my dear, it's more complicated than that." And I say she would have given it up. It was just that I saw this as a story. I used to print regular
Yes, you
resumes of the Press Council letters. But what you saw was a reluctance to them to get involved in the big stories. They were very happy to correct small things. They don't want to be the watchdog. Perhaps it'll change now that Blom Cooper is the new chairman. Certainly, it's not adequate to control us lot.
Well,
Yeah, I actually, as a journalist, live in terror of the Press Council. As you were saying earlier on, Laurie, that journalists appearing before the Press Council would have certainly been in trouble.
Had Harvey Proctor's
Yes,
complaint been
yeah.
against you, had it succeeded, would it have done you any damage on the Sun?
I think
It would have done on
I
the
wasn't
Mirror
on the
Group.
Sun. I was on
No,
the
this
News of the
is
World.
News
Oh, well,
of the World.
sorry,
Yeah.
Sun Group.
News
Yeah,
of the World.
it certainly would have shown me.
That's right, Larry.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing.
I would have been personally horrified to have been done by the Press Council, yes.
But what would have been the effect? Would you have
I
lost
think I
your
would-
job?
I
Would
don't
you
think
have
I would-
lost any income?
No.
Would you have been personally hurt in the way that... And in the nature of politics, I have a thick skin.
Yes, well,
You have to have, if you've been in politics as long as I have.
I think
you
I
have
would
to
have
have
been
a
out
thick
of
skin.
favour.
But the friends and family are not supposed to have carry those thick skins.
But would it
and
not-
yet your article, unchecked, was extremely damaging.
yeah, and I've held my hands up to that
Yes, of
article.
course.
Yeah.
But I'm saying
And I will-
but
if we go back to
I'm
that
going to the
article-
press
Yeah.
to the press
I
con-
wish you had gone to the press council
to
on
the
that.
press council. What is the redress? What is to stop you doing it again? And the
nothing.
apology. Okay, they print an apology, but it wouldn't be with a banner headline like that, like the one that I showed you earlier. Nothing like that.
apology.
It would have been a very small
Word
apology.
exclusive
Or,
apology.
Yeah. Professionally,
yes.
I would have been horrified if I'd have been taken to the Press Council and been done. As far as the office is concerned, I would certainly have been out of favour. I wouldn't have had any decent stories for probably 6
No,
months.
you wouldn't. Look at John Kay, who wrote the Mrs. Mackay interview, or made it up. How has his career suffered? Look at Henry Henry. How has her
I'm talking about
career
me
suffered?
personally.
No, I put it
Yeah.
to you that to be on the Sun or the News of the World and be caught out by the Press Council, to be on the Sun or the News of the World and to be caught out lying
As
is
on
not...
the Sun, I've never worked for the Sun.
Not
I mean,
all
only
the
as a
news of the
freelance.
world is not a drawback to one's career to be caught lying.
Can
No,
I-
to lie is not a drawback. To be caught lying
I
probably
can't
is.
answer for other people. I can only tell you what I feel personally. I feel personally that I would be out of favour. If the Press Council had done me, if there'd been a ruling against me, I would have felt professionally very bad about it. And I certainly think I would have been out of favour with my office.
Harvey said something about Annette not really suffering if the Press Council had taken action against her. And Harvey or anybody who is, as they would probably put it, turned over by the press, and their family and their friends suffer. But there wouldn't be anything to turn over, would there, if it hadn't have happened? I mean, are they suffering because the press have revealed something, or are they suffering because somebody has done something in the first place?
I'm sorry.
That is a false revelation, that particularly.
Right.
But what
Which
I'm
I've held my
talking
hands up
about
to.
is when revelations come out in the press about somebody's private life, be they a politician, be they connected to the royal family, be they whoever, they're not victims of the press. Surely they're victims of their own actions, whether the law is right or wrong.
Can I
Harvey, do you
answer
blame
that?
your downfall, if we can call it a downfall, do you blame your downfall on the press or on your own actions?
I have to say it is the press.
How can you say that?
What I'm saying is that up to that day that I was charged, I did not know that I committed a criminal offence. But up to that day, I did know that I was a homosexual. And that is what I sought to conceal, for the reasons I've already given. I thought it was immaterial to the job that I was doing. But the newspapers were not prepared to accept that position. And what they tried to do, in effect, was not to report the news, but to make the news by trying to get a political change, a political event. And let me give you an example of how they went about it. And it was the People newspaper and a bevy of reporters who went down to a motel in my constituency or just outside it, after I'd been given a vote of confidence by my executive council. That's the local Conservative Party's governing committee, had backed me. They'd seen what the press were trying to do, and they decided they didn't like it, and I won a majority. Now, the Sunday People didn't like that. So what did they do? They sent down 5, 6, I never quite got the right number of reporters into the constituency. Having secreted a tape recording into this private meeting, they then got the name, address and home telephone number of every member of my executive committee, and that's 40 strong. And they then telephoned or went to call, sometimes quite late at night, on every one of the members of my executive committee to try to persuade them to call another meeting to vote a different way the next time. What the people was trying to do, or what Mr. Maxwell was trying to do through his newspaper, was to create a by-election in the Billericay constituency, which we were at one, and I have my critics in my constituency as well as my supporters, but we were at one in making absolutely sure that there would be no by-election in the Billericay constituency, and I was not going to resign. I resigned not as Member of Parliament, but I resigned as candidate for the ensuing Parliament, but I served my full terms.
That's a monstrous allegation. I wasn't on the people that I'd left by the time of your case, but had any journalist when I was on the people been instructed by his news editor or anybody else to go and persuade members of some executive committee to go and vote somewhere or other, they would have refused immediately, and furthermore there was a written code of conduct in the office which every reporter had to sign as having understood it, and this code of conduct included in writing that any journalist who objected to being ordered to do anything had an immediate right of objection to his news editor, and if his news editor didn't satisfy him, he was to go to the editor and object. I don't know any journalist that I could have told, go and persuade a member of a committee to vote this way, especially 40 members.
Perhaps what they did, they liked to do, but that would have been the end product of what they were trying to do. They were trying to persuade the people on that committee by intimidatory tactics, by telephoning, by personal contact, sometimes late at night, trying to play them so-called tapes, trying to show them photographs, trying to show them statements of this or that, to persuade them that at the next meeting, another meeting should be called, and at the next meeting, the vote that they cast one way should be cast another. And it may well be a monstrous allegation. It was a monstrous thing for the people to do, but they did it because they wanted me out. And they wanted...
But your case would be so much stronger if the courts had found you innocent, if you'd pleaded not guilty.
Christine Keeler was saying something about power. What were you saying
Yes,
about
I
power?
absolutely agree with... of course it's true that these papers are power and politics, and of course they would use him to do that. They would like to use me, probably, to have a bit of power over innocent people in many ways, just by being associated with me. But yes, of course they do this.
I don't understand what you mean. Sorry, could you just explain what you mean by that? Well, I don't understand.
You're just a nice mum and housewife now, an ex-carrier. How could you have any power over anybody?
I never said I had power over anybody. I
How would
said
you
that
be used
the newspapers and their proprietors are powerful men, politically, and would use. I'm sure that they would love to use me.
How could they use you?
Well, by sort of saying what a disgraceful and what a dreadful, this dreadful character I am and everything.
25 years ago? What happened 25 years
yes,
ago? How could
well,
that
just recently there's been things been covered which are absolute lies, and leaving it open as if there were other people years ago that I because I'm a liar, I went to prison for lying, that it doesn't matter about her, she's just lying anyway, and just probably bring in innocent people by saying that my bad memory, I can't remember who I had sex with years ago, or just literally by ignoring what I say and using whoever they would like to use, and using me as a weapon. And of course these newspaper people are powerful and political, and they certainly would use something if they were right-wing or left-wing, or if the left whole goes against somebody, against the right, and everything like that. It's common.
But
it's
if you
just
said
common
today
sense.
you had it off with Harry Pollitt, everyone would just laugh, and it wouldn't do old Harry any harm. I don't sort of see...
Jack Kennedy?
It certainly wouldn't do anyone any...
Jack Kennedy?
Yes, now...
Long gone,
now,
too, I mean.
Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. There was a book written recently, which, all but a comma, they put a comma, other than saying that I had said on tape that I'd had something to do with John Kennedy. Of course, there was a comma in there because, and carry on with a memo when it was just a fallacy.
Who was the book written by?
A chap called Philip Knightley and Caroline Kennedy, who did not interview me, but in their press release said that they had interviewed me. So.
But this book wasn't published by a
but
newspaper.
Then I'm poor
this was a
on
book
my own
claiming
and
that
I'm easy.
surely you can't.
Yes,
yes, but surely you can't blame a newspaper for following up
yes,
something that's been written in a book.
And
but what's actually wrong?
On the other hand, Philip Knight,
well, they
very
also
distinguished
left it
journalist,
open
many
about
important
how.
things.
I mean, the police covered the situation at the time very deeply. It was covered very much, but they sort of applied that there were other people involved, which is absolute rubbish. So this is obviously for some future, you know, a blackmailing weapon against some poor chap who I might have met. And so, of course, they...
Not Jack Kennedy. He's dead, and anyhow, he was known as a great ram, and it was years ago. I can't see any power or anything
you
of
mean,
it.
in other words, just say that I have done something which I haven't done, you know, and, you know, it's absolute rubbish. And this is what, as far as I'm concerned...
Sorry, I find that rather disappointing. John Kennedy's so wonderfully attractive. You might at least add him to your list.
I never met him, but what I am saying is that these people certainly added him, and I hadn't even met them.
Wishful thinking.
So, no, well, it's taken the media a bit further, isn't it? By actually using people and saying, you know, and having these sort of powerful games, you know, coming in. So, of course, the left hits the right and the right hits the left, and they use people as weapons.
What do you write? What's your motive when you write the material you write? What are you writing for? We've heard about.
Well, at the moment I'm writing pop stories, so I'm writing...
Why?
Well, because I write a pop column. So a lot of it is sort of small items of gossip and big interviews with stars. That, in that sense, again, it's the old game of people actually wanting to get their name in the paper. People coming to us and saying, hey, I've got a great story for you, print this, or whatever. And as you say, they then later find something else out about them and they don't want to play anymore. My motive for writing, I think, sheer nosiness a lot of the time, on my own part. And also, I suppose, you're writing for a market.
Well, a job, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think as well, if you want to be a top journalist, then you write for the top papers, which was a good reason for writing for the News of the World.
It's funny that you all...
It's the biggest circulation.
Well, mass market is not necessarily... Mass market is one thing. It doesn't mean a top paper. I never regard it as a top paper. I regard it as an excellent job, professionally speaking, because to write for a tabloid newspaper is an extremely difficult thing. I mean, it is as professional a job as writing for the Observer. It is a different style of writing, a different craft. But I would never call the News of the World a top newspaper. It is the largest selling newspaper
that was said
in the English-speaking world.
That was only said in case Rupert Murdoch was watching later.
All of you, as journalists, must remember a story that you may be ashamed of and proud of. I'm sure you remember more clearly the stories you're proud of. Laurie, can you remember a story that you're ashamed of being involved in?
Yes, I thought you might ask that. No, I was never ashamed of being involved in any story, but I was ashamed of not kicking up more fuss when a particular story was killed by management of a particular newspaper I worked for, a story I'd got and which I thought should have been published in the public interest, and managerial, indeed way above managerial influence, had the story killed. I am ashamed. I was much younger then, not the old grizzled fellow I am now, and I wish I had resigned, made a stink, and said this story should be published. I am to some extent ashamed that I didn't in the case of that particular story.
You have your chance now.
I don't, because I am now a poor old retired journalist and I can't defend myself financially against the writs of the very, very, very rich and powerful men involved, one of the biggest names in the country, and a lawyer.
Nina, ashamed of anything?
No, not really. In fact, not at all. I've, as I said, I was a rock writer for many years, and the stories I dealt with were, by and large, feature stories. They weren't news stories. It was a question of assessing people, talking to them as they were at that particular time. And I can't actually remember anything I've ever been ashamed about, I have to say. Sounds dreadful, doesn't it? I'm racking my brains.
I understand equally, sort of, as Nina, and say, no, I honestly don't feel ashamed of a story. I may occasionally have felt ashamed of stories that have appeared in a paper that I've worked for. And in fact, in the case of a local newspaper that I worked for in Brighton, when an article was written by a fellow journalist and columnist, which I found very derogatory towards women, I wrote a letter to the paper disassociating myself from it, and the paper published my letter.
Only one is me holding my hands up again. One story about an actress. She pleaded with me not to mention an item. As our office already knew about it, I argued with my office. They printed it anyway. Her mother wrote to my editor a bit later on describing me as the despicable Miss Witheridge. I quite agreed with her. And I actually wrote a letter back to the mother saying as much. I think that's it.
There's been stories I've been horrified by when I've got them. They turn out to be disastrously wrong, but I genuinely thought, as I thought they were right when I printed them, I'm not ashamed of them, I'm just horrified. I wake up in the night thinking, God, you really mucked it up. But not, I think you have to be ashamed of it. It's something you shouldn't have written. And we do have this sort of privileged position on the so-called quality press, that we're not required to do marriage breakups or pop gossip or anything that you might somehow feel, I don't know, ashamed of.
But I certainly wouldn't be ashamed to write a story about a marriage breakup of a film star or
I had to
an
do
actor.
one once. It was tangential to the story. The story about some security lapse in which the man in question was having an affair with so-and-so. And what I most remember was the editor on the Observer, Donald Trolford, said, does this man's wife know he's having an affair? Because I don't want her to read it first in the Observer. So I, of course, rang her up and said, did you know your husband was having an affair? I mean, it so happened that she did know, so it was all right. But it wasn't a marriage breakup story, but it was a highly relevant aspect. But I was very impressed by the logic, that it wasn't sort of my duty to inform the wife. I mean, I couldn't write a story. I mean, the Hickey on the Daily Express, there used to be a story that their motto was a song in my heart, I broke up a marriage today. And I don't think, I mean, I'm sure Nigel Dempster can do it, or Ross Benson, but I don't think I could ring someone up.
I must be a failed journalist, you see. I mean, because down the years I've had relationships, just friendly relationships with people who've sat with great stories to tell. I mean, when Andrew Lloyd Webber was going through his first marriage breakup, I was very friendly with Sarah, the first Sarah, and she spent a lot of time confiding in me and telling me all the horrendous things that were going on. And when you're going through a divorce, it is very messy. And as a proper journalist, I suppose I should have at some point shopped her or used her in some way, and I couldn't do that. I could never do anything like that. And I suppose that's why I've got out of it. There's no way I'm going to do that.
In your ivory tower, Peter, are you ever required, I don't mean you, I mean the journalists on your paper, are you ever required to do stories not about marriage breakups, such things as that, but about things like who or not is buying Harrods and why not and such like? Is that ever?
Yeah, of course. But that's legitimately interesting. So are you meaning our people on the Observer, are we influenced by the fact that our proprietor is locked in mortal conflict with the man who's bought Harrods?
You put it out.
Let me say that this is a story that is given very thoughtful consideration before a word.
I bet it's red hot coals in the Observer office.
And it so happens that my paper has taken the side of Mr. Tiny Roland and Monroe.
Amazing.
Staggering.
And it may surprise you that our arch rival, the Sunday Times, has taken the side of the Al-Fayeds.
Gasp, horror.
I'm sure the Both facts are entirely coincidental and in no way hamper our freedom. I said that in case Mr. Rowland is...
See, what it all comes down to money, isn't it? It comes down to money, basically. Really, that's what journalism's about, that's what publishing's about, that's what newspapers are about, money and power. And in the process, human beings get hurt. Now, is there any way to change that? You can't change that. That's what happens. Money will always win through when it comes to sacrificing humans and sacrificing people. Money will always win. Money and power. I don't know how you change that in any way.
Don't forget entertainment. And it seems to me when people go into a newsagent's shop, there are, I don't know, 8, 10 newspapers on sale. And it's no different from packets of biscuits. You're total liberty to buy the Sun or the Guardian, News of the World or the Observer, in the same way that you can buy Digestive or Shortbread or whatever. And they have to entertain. And I defend myself on the Lonro thing by saying that I don't think humanity cares that much.
Why do you need to defend yourself?
Yes, I didn't accuse
Because
you. I asked the question.
we're always attacking people. We have to be able to defend ourselves.
Now, why do you feel the need to defend yourself is the question.
Because I'm being very pompous. Yeah, that'll do.
Is there a second answer? Is there a second answer?
Because I think we go around we either make moral judgments in the leader column, or we point the way towards moral judgments.
Is it because you've been caught out with your hand a bit in the till here because you were trying to get this high moral ground and then Laurie kind of put it to you?
Ah, but no, because...
Stiffed you a
No,
bit?
no. Fortunately, like the cavalry rushing in to rescue the beleaguered settlers, the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, came to our rescue, the Observer, by launching an inquiry into the purchase of Harrods. I agree with you until that miraculous moment. We were, shall we say, what's the phrase? Economical with the truth. No, we weren't lying. We were...
You're babbling, Peter.
I know.
You're really babbling. It's wonderful sight. You're watching
assembly.
Trying to think very quickly, just in case Mr. Rowland is watching.
It's like a guy going through treacle here.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Would somebody please change the
You've got
subject?
porridge. You've got
this is
porridge
we're
in your
sticking
wellies.
overall.
You've got
Come on,
porridge in
guys,
your
let's,
wellies, so you can't get
Let's
out
get
of
this.
You're an investigative journalist.
No, come on, wake up.
Could I add a question too on the same subject to add to his difficulties? I hope the Sunday Times some time ago
Don't ask
published
it me, ask
quite a few details about Tiny Rowland's wartime service. Some of you may remember he left the army British Army very suddenly in 1940 in very unusual circumstances after his parents, who were enemy aliens, had very unfortunately been detained under the Enemy Aliens Order. And the Sunday Times made a number of astonishing statements in a long profile on Mr. Rowland. No doubt they were influenced by this struggle you've mentioned too. I would have thought that the Observer would have done the definitive story, perhaps even if it was only a definitive story, in the same way that Mr. Joe Haynes did about Mr. Maxwell.
I'm sure we did. I'm sure we did, and you missed it. No, you didn't. Well, come on. It's, I mean, I would argue, if you like, that the quality press has perhaps higher moral standards than tabloid press, but clearly perhaps not high enough. Yeah, I mean, of course.
But can it ever have high standards when it's actually dictated to by money and the lust for power?
Can I ask you a question? Let me ask you a question, Nina. No, I was thinking...
treasure.
We were talking earlier with Lester and so on as to how far, what are the limits to which you would take this pursuit of, quote, a story? What line do you draw? What criteria do you set as to when you're going to write the story? When you were saying before, you were talking to a good friend and you thought, if I were a good journalist, I'd shop her, and I didn't. How do you do that? How do you draw the line here?
I've only ever gone on instinct. I don't know any other way on human feelings. I mean, it's like when you're writing a piece, when you're writing a review, when you're writing anything, your own emotions come into play. You have to follow your own guidelines. There's no other way.
And I know that if I had been a good journalist, I mean, in the true sense of the word, that would have meant nothing. I would have followed what my news editor had wanted me to do and what was best for my paper. But I've never been that sort of journalist, and I never wanted to be it, and I'm glad I'm nowhere near any part of it. I'm not being moralistic about it. I'm trying not to be pompous about it, but I'm just stating a fact. I didn't have the stomach for it. Don't like it.
I don't believe the same power politics that we were talking about in the case of Harvey come into play when you're writing show business stories. But you do still have some responsibilities, and I worked as a freelance for a national newspaper and was told that when a woman had been appointed head of sport, I can't remember if it was radio or television now, she was a single woman, aged 45, looked very butch, so she must be a dyke, a lesbian. So I was told to go out and get the story that she was a lesbian. I was actually to ask her if she was a lesbian, and I said, no, I wouldn't. Because, I mean, it just wasn't a story. But if that woman had a high profile, if she was appearing on television, if she was hosting a chat show or something, and somebody came in and said she is having a lesbian affair with another woman, blah blah blah, here are the facts, and it's very often this information comes from supposed friends of these people. Managers of pop stars will put out stories to you about the person that they're handling purely to get publicity for their pop star, and then condemn you for printing the story, having given it to you in the first place. Yes, you're going to follow up a story like that. There aren't guidelines there, and you're going to go into it.
Is it important to know that she's lesbian?
What if the woman says it's none of your business?
Alter our perceptions of her?
If she says it's none of your business, is it therefore your duty to go out and prove it definitely one way or the other?
I think
and what does that mean?
The mere fact that she is a lesbian isn't really of my business, and actually I don't, it isn't particularly a story. But if they have a blazing row in the middle of the night and she throws the other woman out into the street, and the neighbours are woken up, as I think there was a case in one of the papers yesterday about a Coronation Street star having a row with her boyfriend, whether she's a lesbian or a heterosexual or whatever. I mean, the fact that it has then come to the attention of somebody, it's a story because of who they are, because they've built their career in television on publicity. That you can't go into the limelight and then back off as soon as the glare gets too strong.
Well, they might not. They might just be a talented sort of a person, like a talented singer or a talented musician. So they haven't built their life.
It's where they court publicity all the same.
All the time. No matter how talented they are.
Just talented.
There are a lot of... which is what I said earlier, there are a lot of talented actors and actresses who don't court publicity and just get on with doing their job and appear at the National every night, and nothing is ever written about them. There are other people. There is hypocrisy on our side, and there's hypocrisy on their side.
You said two things there. You said that if you were told by your news desk to go out and find whether woman A is a lesbian, you wouldn't. But if somebody came into you with proof that woman A was a lesbian, you would print it.
I wouldn't just print it because somebody came in and told me.
No, you check it out. But I don't quite see the difference between your
talk
moral refusal to go out and find out if she's lesbian and to check out a story that she might be.
Because in the first case, this was a news editor wanting to invent a story, was trying to create a story that whether he didn't know whether it existed or not. The other was that something had actually been brought out into the open, had been brought. The very fact that somebody had rung up and said...
You see, I would argue that... I know Mr. Proctor disagrees, but I say in his case it was relevant. I would say that to be head of sports or whatever, in what way does it matter? In what way can you justify intrusion into private life on grounds of hypocrisy or the public right to know, whatever?
You're talking about titillation.
I'm not talking about the public
right to know. You are pandering to this. By saying
I refuse to do that first one.
You're not refusing to do it if someone comes into you with proof that the head of sport this woman is a lesbian. You are saying, I'll check it out, and if it's true, I'll
check it out. And if
because people are fascinated by other people's sex lives. There is no...
As a nation, we're fascinated.
You were
by
horrified
sex.
when your sex life was revealed.
I was horrified because who's interested in my sex life? I'm extremely interested in it, but I can't think who else can be.
Because people, I mean, you would argue that there's more interest in your sex life because people will see you in a taxi and say, "Oh, look, isn't that the woman on New Faces?" They will not say, "Oh, look, isn't that the head of sport?" So I would argue if there is a case, there's a bigger one for you.
I mean, I find it very hard to. You may think this is ridiculous, but I'm always startled when people recognise me, or when you're actually going.
Happy.
Not necessarily.
Aren't toy boys the latest sexual fad? Aren't millions of middle-aged women
No, they're
fascinated
wonderful human
and interested when
I
they
love
read
them all.
huge features on toy boys? And
What did you
lots
mean
of
by
middle-aged women think perhaps I'd like to try one. That's why your story was partly of interest. Here you were, a successful business middle-aged woman with respect, with a toy boy. Millions of middle-aged women would be fascinated by that. They'd fantasise and imagine it might be them. The same as if you like, older men like me might look at a picture of a young pretty girl and think, my goodness.
One thing I'd like to raise, which came up a little earlier, was this notion that you might sometimes, I think it was Mr. Proctor was saying, you might sometimes in your investigation trespass on someone's property or bend the law a bit. And I wonder whether journalists are slightly having their cake and eat it here, where they're saying so-and-so is breaking the law, but in getting the story that so-and-so is breaking the law, they themselves are breaking the law, but think that their breaking of the law is some way justified, that they're some way above the law. What do you think about that, Peter Hilmore?
Trespass on anybody's property. Stop. I don't break the law. That is the limit I would draw on
Never
my
have you ever broken the law? Do you know the law?
I hope so.
What about the story you wrote about Mr. Proctor?
Yeah.
Would that not be breaking the law?
I certainly can be done for libel.
In what way?
The European Convention on Human Rights is privacy.
I don't
that's not law in this country.
Well, that's right. It's all to do with human
Well, yes,
rights.
it is, but that's another matter. We can pursue this somewhere else.
Apart from the law on human rights, there's an admission here of a commission of libel. I think.
Oh, no, hang on, no. Sorry, you could
quickly taken back because
you
I think after an article appears on libel, I think you have a period of time, and off the top of my head, I think it's 2 years.
Oh,
so it'd be very interesting to read the transcript of your admission earlier to see whether in fact.
Sure.
The lady's confessed, you're not involved.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm a nice chap, so I'm not going to go after you.
I confessed a lot earlier.
But the press are not nice chaps and girls, and they do have to go after the likes of me.
Well, I have earlier confessed to quite clearly breaking the law in a major investigation. I have confessed to committing fraud in impersonating a senior police officer. And indeed, at the time of that inquiry, the Yard did consider prosecuting us. The officers, before they were arrested, tried to get some kind of case against us for doing that. But then the event was so big in itself, major corruption, Scotland Yard, etc., that our little foible disappeared. So the answer to your question, sir, is I think it depends how big the story is. A little deception will get by if it reveals something really big, but not if it's in a piddling small
And
piece
indeed,
of
there are
nonsense.
guidelines on this. There are guidelines in television where the IBA will sanction clandestine film recording and tape in certain circumstances. It is accepted that you cannot confront a policeman and he will say, "Oh, thank God, you've confronted me. I can get it off my chest and confess."
I once concealed a camera in a girl's brassiere. Here's a titillating piece, no pun intended. I don't know about tape recorders in trousers, rather unwise in your investigation. Sir.
Keeping abreast of the story.
Yes, of course.
That's down to your colleague on the People's newspaper reporters.
We were investigating vivisection, a very serious subject, not fairly recently, only a few years ago. What really happened to animals in experiments, especially if they weren't for medical purposes, for commercial purposes. Now, all the big firms who do it don't talk about it. It's very secret. It's behind barbed wire in many cases. The only way we could do it, we decided, was to get staff as employees in some of the major research firms. A very long and expensive project. Took months to get them in. And in one case, we got a young girl reporter into the ICI laboratories. ICI, couldn't get a bigger firm than that, and there's no libel here because it was all published. And she got into the laboratories, and what did she find? A large number of beagle dogs who were strapped up in cases, had masks put over their face and were compelled to smoke 30 cigarettes a day as part of tests for a new smoking mixture that might not be so cancerous and therefore might make a bomb in sales. Now, the only proof of this, that girl's word would have been useless. She's some girl journalist, isn't she? Dreadful press making it all up, wanted a sensation, all that sort of nonsense.
That's what the press should be
well,
doing.
oh, yes. So she had to take a picture. Well, she couldn't walk in as an ICI dog muck sweeper, because that was her job in the laboratory. In effect, she couldn't walk in toting a camera, so we hid a camera in her bra. At an appropriate moment, she took it out. I won't say press the tip, nobody will enjoy. But she took a picture which became a notorious picture worldwide, led to a parliamentary debate. 300 MPs supported the motion, and the Home Secretary changed the law to prevent such experiments.
And that's very good. And I think that's
Well,
what
it was
the press should
subterfuge.
be
It was
there
subterfuge
for.
and a fraud and a trick and taking pictures illegally
Would
on
that have
other
been
people's
breaking the law?
premises. That's against the law, sir, isn't it? Without their permission.
Yes.
I wonder whether doorstepping, which looks like trespass, isn't it, is justified. What do you think, Lester? It's an easy example. Why, if you do doorstepping, why is that? Why are you entitled to do that when others aren't?
How do you mean that others aren't?
Well, most people regard it as against the law and would be restrained. You're in pursuit of something you regard as a noble ideal, a showbiz story.
Well, if I broke the law, I would expect to be, I'd expect to be prosecuted. But I certainly don't see anything wrong if you're following a story and standing on somebody's doorstep. I also don't see anything wrong in ringing their doorbell at 1:15 in the morning in pursuit of a story. Depending on what the story is, I haven't been involved in any investigative
If they told you to go away?
journalism. If they tell me to go away, then I might go and stand on the other side of the street. But I mean, doorstepping doesn't always literally mean standing on the doorstep. You can doorstep in a car parked outside a house, and you can't be prevented from doing that. And then when the person came out in the morning or whatever, if I'd been there all night, I would then go up to him and try and talk to him or her. And it would then be up to him or her as to whether or not they wish to speak to me.
You would stay there until you got a story.
In the case
However many weeks.
there was actually a forcible entry
And I
by 75-year-old
And I
mother.
said
She
to you, I
wasn't
said-
75 at that time, but she was certainly elderly. She was just into her 70s. And that was very distasteful. And what is the reason for it? The reason wasn't to find some mad vivisectionist activity or something criminal going on in my little semi-detached house in Billericay, which was her home as well as mine. It was just to see whether I was in that sitting room behind the front door or not, because they didn't believe that because they couldn't get hold of me at the House of Commons, and they were told that I was en route to Billericay, they didn't comprehend the fact that British rail trains happened to be late on occasions. And my mother didn't actually know that I was heading down for Billericay. I turned up unexpected a bit later, find her in quite a state because she'd been not attacked, but she'd been roughly treated by the press. Now, I think that is quite monstrous and intolerable. Now, I don't know whether, I suppose possibly one could have got an action in law against the correspondents in that case. That happened some years ago, and is a different incident in terms of the incident that happened last year. But what culminated last year also, I believe, had the press or certain representatives of the press taken certain actions which were flying very close to the wind with regard to the law. Certainly, as Sir David Napley said at my trial, there's a technical break-in at my London flat. I was told by attendants at the House of Commons that quite a senior Daily Mirror reporter had been in my private office at the House of Commons, where he had absolutely no right and no business to be. That was quite monstrous, looking over my papers or doing whatever he wanted to do without my presence and without any authority.
Would you do that,
there was the taking of
story
property
was
from my London flat.
But I wouldn't break the law. I would never have the opportunity to be inside the House of Commons looking through people's papers.
If somebody gave you the chance.
If I suppose actually, yeah, if the door was open, I might just walk in. I don't know. I mean, you play it by ear.
It would partly depend on the story.
We wouldn't
as
get
well.
the sack.
You see, this is
We broke the
monstrous
law,
behaviour,
it's
but
the second bit of
what
that.
they were trying to prove was not a criminal, again, back to Mr. Hilmer, it wasn't a criminal charge that they were trying to make stick at that time. It was really to sort of try and push me from my cover that I'd decided upon, thought very hard and long about whether to take the Chris Smith option of declaring oneself or not, decided in my wisdom or otherwise against it, for the reason, not that I was ashamed of being homosexual or proud of it, it was that it had no bearing whatsoever on the job that I was doing, and therefore I decided not to do it. I respect other people who take a different view, but that was the view I'd taken. And yet here was the media, week after week, day after day. Remember, I was in the Sunday People 6 Sunday editions on the trot in 1986, the end of 1986. And can I tell you something?
Were they accusing you of being a homosexual, or were they accusing you of spanking
Well,
rent boys?
a whole mixture of things, and all other things, all sorts of things interwoven. All sorts of things.
Can I suggest to you, Mr. Proctor, that as we perhaps get tired and move towards the end of the programme, it might be interesting, in the light of what you've just said about 6 weeks on the trot, if we look at today's papers, i.e. Sunday's papers, and see what they have to say about what's the news of the day. I happen to have them.
Well, I got some too, but they're in my carry bag, which one of your attendants
wondered whether I could
got by supply.
Let's take Mr. Hillmore's paper first. Now, this is the Observer. This is Mr. Hillmore's paper, and we see it's full of front-page stories of great prestige. But there is, Mr. Hillmore, this thing, the magazine section. There's a little photograph of a woman with no clothes on, titillating us. What do you say about that? Is that part of the course of the Observer? A small amount of breast is all right.
Frankly, the story about Britain to
She's
pay
rather
around
flat-chested
1
too,
million.
but she would
What's
be,
wrong?
you see.
Actually, no. I mean, what is wrong? Of course, it's there. I presume to titillate and to reveal to those Observer readers who don't know it that women have breath. They know it. It's not tawdry. It's not taken. So what?
What about
It's
this?
a holiday snack anyway.
Look at this story here, what Mr. Proctor was talking about. MP shower girl expecting a baby. Tout ça change, Mr. Proctor? Same sort of thing?
I think that story refers, I read it in the car coming here tonight, about a Member of Parliament. He's a Labour Member of Parliament. I thoroughly disagree with his political views, but I believe he's been treated in a personal way quite abominably by the press. I believe that his political views are open to question and open to debate and probing, as mine were. But I believe that they are trying to get at him for his personal endeavours. No, I'm sorry. No, can I just finish this? I think this is quite wrong. Because this chap is going through very much what I went through last year. And before you started throwing around the Sunday papers, I was about to develop this. That what is the impact on the personality? You're forgetting. You think these characters are cardboard cutouts. They're not. They're flesh and blood. They're real people. And they have to read this. I got into the habit of going up to town to get the early editions on of the Sunday papers on the Saturday night, because I knew that my telephone would start ringing with reporters from 10, 11 o'clock onwards, asking me to comment on something that was in papers. So you had to go and get them. Then all the way through Sunday, you had to field the questions from all the other press because of what was in one or two papers. The following day, on the Monday, you had your local papers in your constituency, the local nightly papers. That might run for a couple of days with the national newspapers swimming along for another couple of days. Then by the end of the week, you're coming up to the weekly press. And any Member of Parliament has a host of weekly papers in his constituency, all of whom wanted comments and stories. By which time you were round to the next weekend, and it went on and on and on. And it is intolerable for that to go on for week after week, month after month. And the people who have to suffer that, because I suffered it, I think are incredibly brave and courageous to put up with it. And if only the press... I'm sorry that Nina had to put up with it for a few days. But if you had to put up with that sort of onslaught, and in my case thinking that it was my livelihood that was being taken away, my job, something that I actually wanted to do since the age I was 14, and the ambit was to try and do me down to get me out.
Do you think what's happening here? Is this
I think that the newspapers are trying to get him out.
I'm intrigued by it. I mean, I just want to read it and find
Yes,
out more.
I do. I think it's political the other way. Because
it shows how balanced the press
That's a good story.
Well, I'm not sure that it does show balance.
Can we look at another one? Sunday Express.
Pass over that.
Exclusive first picture of Tumbledown's Victoria. I'm a caring person, says TV row girl. The woman who was alleged to have been the object of the sexual attentions of the man in the Tumbledown play. Christine Keeler, have any resonances for you?
I haven't read it, actually. Tumbledown play.
There she is, this girl who's suddenly become the object of attention because of a play.
Yes, and the newspapers purely reacting to something that's been on television and being watched by millions of people. Quite justified.
Well, she's having a chance
Quite
to
justified, and now
But
she's
I
having
would
the
never
chance
speak
to
the
reply.
press, but they would still...
Yeah, she was portrayed in a particular way.
Yes.
But there are people who might think she was very hard-hearted in the way she dealt with him.
And this is an interview. This is, in fact, the press intruding into her private life and doing her a service by actually showing that she's not the kind of girl that a drama on television, pure fiction or faction, portrayed her as.
Does this really look like a picture that she objected to being taken? Does
No.
it look like the press intruded on her? You can see the horror on her face. You can see the way the picture is blurred and out of focus. She posed for it.
The Mail on Sunday. Hostage hotel, Terry Waite. Is this the kind of investigative journalism you remember from your days? That doesn't seem to be on the other paper.
No, that's largely overseas and not relative to immediate effects in this country.
I could work
good
that out for
story,
myself. I must do.
Well, that's not what I was concerned with. Yeah,
I see.
Good story.
And the Telegraph. 2 in 3 condemn homosexual acts and lifestyle. Harvey Proctor?
I haven't read it.
I've just read you the headline.
Quite typically, you're falling into the trap of reporters and the press who always want you to comment on the least amount of information when they've got all of it. And what they don't tell you is there's something in the final paragraph which says something completely different, or that they've interviewed 25 people on a wet, windy day in Burnley.
What I was wondering is whether you see an echo of this, of the kind of, if you'll forgive me, Mr. Proctor, an echo of the kind of whipping up of hostility about homosexuality, which you said you were in part a victim. After all, there's another story here. Is there a gay plot? Page 17.
I think my difficulty in that my case came against a background of a gay rights movement getting very active, and I think many people have reacted adversely to the gay rights movement that have been very counterproductive to their cause. And I believe that there is a backlash, and I don't believe the backlash is coming from politicians. I believe that it's reflecting their constituents looking at the very aggressive stance of the gay rights movement in this country, which is very counterproductive for the people that they claim actually to represent. And I realise that having to sort of live through my year, that was a difficulty. It was always a difficulty. That was the background. If it had happened a few years ago, or at a slightly different time,
You mean pre-AIDS?
things may well have had a different reaction. And all of the AIDS background didn't help at all. And therefore, the article that was written, and which tonight, at long last, I've got an apology for,
you hadn't asked for an apology before.
was very deadly. Quite frankly, I haven't talked to the press until tonight, or until this last week. I've had a standard quotation, which has been that I've got nothing to say to you. I think many of you, not necessarily around this table, but many of the ones that I've actually had dealings with are rats, and two-faced and two-timed, because they say one thing to you on the telephone when they're talking to you, and you read what they say the next morning. They've got their story. You've got to live with the damage that their story is going to cause.
Mr. Proctor, do you think you have to ask for an apology, or do you think you're entitled to one before asking for one?
Well, I think that in the case that we mentioned earlier, the defence from Annette was, nobody asked me to write a correcting piece.
Well, I only found out 4 months later when I actually found the person who was supposed to be the AIDS victim.
Yes.
Who said, "Oh no, I thought that was hilarious."
But immediately you found out, without any reference to me, you should have been on to the editor of that paper, and there should have been an equally prominent article saying that the article written 4 months earlier was completely wrong.
More to the point, shouldn't you have found the AIDS victim before you wrote the story?
Yes.
But one would have hoped so, yes.
Well,
Well, we'd all have hoped so.
Yeah, well,
Here we go. Here's
why
another one.
was the story printed?
This is your sort of story, Lester, perhaps, in
Because
the
it
people.
was me.
The
No,
secret
they
of
saw a decision it was
secret
beyond
of
me.
Benny's bags.
Look at the one on the bottom, it's much more interesting.
My 3 in the bed romp with Frank Boff exclusive.
Why
Is this
did
your
you
sort of story?
Yes, very much so. Yes. And
What,
it's
the
Benny
Frank
Hill.
Boff or the bags?
Well, in fact,
Benny Hill.
both,
Or the-
both stories.
or Frank Boff's
Boff
bags.
for Frank Boff's bags and Benny Hill's bags as well. Both.
Here we have the
It's not
Three
an
bags
advertisement.
full. Sunday
If you're
Times.
passing over the people, by the
Sunday
way,
Mirror.
it's not quite worded as I would have worded it, but I do see on page 6 that there is a little promotional spot for my shop in Richmond.
Oh my God.
So you presumably don't find the journalist that wrote that a rat?
Oh, I do. Well, I do indeed. I
Close
regard
up
him
on
to be
the
very
show.
right.
Before, Mr. Proctor, before the commercial breaks are normally brought in rather than form part of the programme. But before you do it again, may I thank you enormously for coming. May I thank you for watching. May I ask you to watch next week. The programme will begin at 11:30 next week, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Good night to you, and good night, and thank you to all of you.